If you don't know me, my name's Patricia Gray, and on behalf of Thinking Faith Network, it's my pleasure to welcome everybody to this Unloosing the Chains of Injustice, Thinking, Praying and Acting on Modern Slavery conference. Start then with the word of God in Isaiah 58 verse 6. Says the Lord, is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loosen the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke? Now, I know that every one of our speakers today could preach an entire sermon on this verse, far better than I could, so I won't. But I'll just observe that tomorrow, as you probably realise, is the first Sunday in Advent. And there's another scripture that's often read at this time about the coming of the Messiah as the babe in Bethlehem, also from Isaiah in chapter 9, verse 2. And you'll all be so familiar with this. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. When we read this passage at our Advent services or our carol evenings, we often skip straight to verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. But in missing out verses 3 to 6, we can miss out on a great truth. Verse 3 says, you have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. And the good news of the Prince of Peace coming in, it's not just for one nation, one tribe, gender, language group, class or colour. It's universal. It's also liberating. Verse 3 goes on to say, they rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when sharing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressors. When we work to break oppression of any kind, including any kind of slavery, we are taking our place in the Christmas narrative, in the gospel story. I read recently in Scandinavia that they refer to the Christmas season as Jul, J-U-L. The origin of that word is revolution. So when Nordic people wish you a good Jul, they are in fact wishing you a good revolution. And this is, I think, the essential message of the Christmas and Advent readings, that above all else, Jesus came to shatter the yokes that burden people, to break the bar across enslaved shoulders and to break the rod of their oppressors. So cutting bonds, breaking rods, shattering yokes so that they can't be used again is often very hard work. It can be the prayers and the work of a lifetime. It takes energy, it takes skill, it takes strength, it takes perseverance, it takes prayer, it takes community. It's not for the faint-hearted, but revolution is possible. We're going to find out more about what that looks like today. So let's pray, and then I'll hand over to Anne Burghgraef, who's going to introduce our first speaker. Can we pray together? Father God, thank you that we can come together to hear and to learn today. We thank you for your presence with us. As we listen, may we hear with our inner spiritual ears. Enlighten our spiritual eyes too, Lord, as to how we can be part of the ongoing mission of Christmas, the ongoing revolution of freedom, that the message of Jesus the Liberator is to all people. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you that he came as a saviour to bring freedom, justice and mercy, not just for us, but for everyone on earth. And we thank you, Lord, that this revolution of love is our commission too. Help us in it, Holy Spirit. Help us as we think, pray and act on what we hear today, Lord. Amen. excuse me, I'm going to hand over to my dear friend, Anne Burghgraef, who's going to introduce our first speaker, Elaine Storkey. Thank you, Anne.
Okay. Well, thank you, Patricia, for those incredibly inspiring words on it is a frosty morning. I have a slight Canadian sort of cynicism about the snow, because I know it's going to vanish despite my greatest wishes for it to continue within minutes. But I'm glad we're all safe at home and keeping warm. Anyways, in my capacity as, a trustee of Thinking Faith Network, I'm so pleased to introduce Elaine Storkey. Elaine has been a very long-term friend and supporter of Thinking Faith Network, and she probably doesn't need an introduction, but I will introduce her anyways, because she's a well-known academic, educator, author of many books, particularly around issues of gender, sexuality, relationships, and has probably done more than anybody else in the UK to introduce issues around equality and feminism and helping the church to grapple with those issues. Elaine's also been very involved with working with organizations, NGOs like Tear Fund and other organizations that support and help women to realize their potential. And she's also been active broadcasting. So a very busy woman who's accomplished so much in her lifetime. And so it's a great honor and a pleasure to say, welcome, Elaine. We're really pleased that you're here.
Thank you ever so much, Patricia, for that lovely introduction and homily and prayer time, and to Anne for a very kind introduction to myself. I realized with some horror when I was looking through the presentation that I was going to give you, looking at my notes from the days of yore, that I first started talking about human trafficking in 1998. And I first gave a PowerPoint presentation in 2004, and we're now 2021. And all that's happened is that it's got worse. And that is a shock and a horror to realize that even though Christians have been involved for a very long time, I think it's one of the areas of Christian active service that we caught on about fairly early on. We didn't catch on about a lot of other things, but we did catch on about this. But in spite of our own activity, in spite of things like Stop the Traffic, in spite of the books that have been written and the talks that have been given and the groups that exist all over the country, the whole issue of human trafficking is still a powerful issue. And it's really recognizing what we're up against that we need to combat this. My talk is just largely going to be about the factual situation, about what trafficking is, how it operates, who's involved, and so on. And I'm leaving it to Tim Nelson, to do the personal stuff, because I've heard him before and I know he can do this. And even though I love doing it, I think that this is his bag today. So if you'll bear with me, I'll now try to share my screen, but I will need to be hosted. You've got it. Okay, fine. Good. So we'll start from the beginning and point out that actually, let's just move this little. Can you see this green icon as well? I'm trying to get rid of some of the bits. So even though we've got all of this stuff going on, even though people like Gary Hagen are making these statements, even though slavery was actually abolished 150 years ago, we've still got this massive problem on our hands, fueled entirely by profit. And if you look at the global data on human trafficking, you'll just see what kind of problem it is and how big it is. I was going to do something on traffic flows, but it was going to take forever and ever. So I just left you with this particular diagram, and we'll get on to the main thing here. I'm going to move the person's screen somewhere else so we can actually see. I don't really want all of the rest of you on this. What can you see on your thing? Can you see all the people as well as me? No, okay then. So what is human trafficking? Well, it's the acquisition, exploitation of people through means like force, fraud, deception, and the practice ensnares millions, particularly of women and girls, but also men and boys, into modern day slavery. And many of them are actually sexually exploited. And we'll look at the ways in which it differs. So it's a hidden crime, but it's found in every country. It's found in every region of the world. And perpetrators can actually get away with it because they operate largely in the dark recesses of the global economy. It's going on all over the place because the networks, the traffic flows, the traffic personnel, the people involved in it form an underbelly, really, of economic transactions across the world. It operates in areas of poverty. It operates in the shadows of the internet. The internet is probably one of the reasons why we've had this massive outburst of extra kinds of profiteering and trafficking, as it's made it possible for girls to be groomed and actually conned in a much larger way than they could before. Grooming on the internet has become a very big area of human trafficking. From then, of course, the perpetrators find their victims. They find them on the streets. They find them in poor houses. They find them in communities where poverty is really bitten into the community and where people are very hungry. They find them in malicious community transactions where people are happy to sell their neighbor into some kind of poverty and exploitation. And they forced them into labor. So where they will end up will be in sexual exploitation, forced labor, domestic servitude, in the militia. Many young boys are recruited to be part of a militia to carry guns and fire at people, and also criminal activity, stealing, thieving. It has all the kind of ramifications of Oliver Twist and the way in which he got his little group of tiny mercenaries together. Forced marriage, trade in organs even, amongst many other forms of abuse. But the interesting thing, it's female victims globally comprise, it's actually 71% of the total global population of victims. And in 2018, for every 10 victims detected globally, 5 of them were adult women and 2 were girls. So, I mean, it was slightly over that because it's 71%. About a third of the overall detected victims in 2018, that's the last annual figure we've got for the whole global enterprise, were children. A third of them were children. So that's a ghastly reality when you think about it. 20% were adult men. That's actually quite low, but we understand that because in a sense, there's less for men to do other than forced labor and the militia. And of course, men have got their way of avoiding it. This then, the vulnerability of female victims kind of hits you in the face. And I've been involved in anti-trafficking measures and in kind of Christians working with prostitution and forming alliances to try to eradicate this too, and talking to women who have been trafficked. And I've talked to many, many women. It is a desperate situation. And when you hear their stories about how they could not break out of the cycle of exploitation and punitive kind of attacks on their body and their person and their mentality and their psyche, you just fear like mad for all of those left behind. Just looking at the graph here, the brown figures are female, the blue figures are male. Thankfully, it's a small percentage now of male children who are trafficked. It's interesting to know why that is, but of course the global figures differ from region to region. This is the overall global pattern, and it's different from when you go into different areas. So South Asia, for example, let's try and get this, is predominant, South Asia, when you look at the figures there, it's a region of origin for regular migrants to destinations outside South Asia. Mostly people are trafficked to areas quite close to the ones that they actually live in. For obvious reasons, it's easier to traffic them. It's easier to get away from the police inspection, to be arrested and imprisoned for the whole business. And it's easier to pick up local perpetrators, people who will work the network. But nevertheless, some people are trafficked thousands of miles. And every new mile of trafficking distance from where your origin is makes you more vulnerable. People are often trafficked to places where they can't speak the language, where they lose their passport and so on. But the majority of the migrants smuggled through Central Asia come from South Asia, especially, for example, from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. And they're trafficked for all kinds of reasons. Countries in sub-Saharan Africa have far more children trafficked than adults. It's a bigger ratio than you find in the rest of the world. And they're trafficked for, again, I'm afraid, for manual labor, but also for militia. When you're driving through some of the war-torn areas of Africa, you'll find an awful lot of young boys carrying guns bigger than they are and pointing them at you. And it's a terrifying experience, believe me, to have a child of 10 point a gun at you, because you're thinking, does he know how to operate this? Am I about to go up in smithereens? And it's not funny. I was very impressed actually by a pastor who was driving me down, and we were stopped at a checkpoint by 5 young boys. I think the oldest can't have been older than 13, who demanded cigarettes. And the pastor got out of the car without a care in the world and without an ounce of fear, and explained to them that they should be at home or they should be at school. They should not be standing there carrying guns, and certainly not smoking, as though smoking was the worst possible crime. And he wasn't going to give them money, and they had to show more respect to their elders. And he got in the car and drove away. I mean, I just laughed my socks off because he said afterwards, they're dangerous young men, but you have to know how to treat them. So there's a higher rate of adult victims detected in Central Asia and Eastern Europe. So the patterns are kind of regional. The patterns are different depending on what the specific needs of a particular community are. When you look at migration from South Asia, that's taking place to Europe and the North Americas. And the smuggling of South Asian migrants by air, which is now quite a big thing. It involves fraudulent travel, identity documents, and so on. So the getting hold of the necessary documents to board international flights, pass immigration controls and so on, and get to destination countries is an industry in itself. And there are a whole load of people who are paid and employed simply to provide the documents needed for illegal trafficking. And when you think of the size of that industry, the way that passports are stolen and disappeared, and photographs are doctored and so on. And we know, and the police know this, the international police are very well aware that every stolen passport is quite likely to end up in the hands of a trafficker, and particularly where the stolen passport belongs to somebody who comes into the categories that they need. So fraudulent documents, passports, visas, also birth certificates. Birth certificates of people, again, are very easy to obtain. Other identification papers can be forged and altered far more easily than almost any other form of, especially in some countries. If you look at the birth certificates in some parts of Africa, they're very, very flimsy. They're not at all easy to anchor in one particular identity. And the fraudulent possibilities are huge. So the documentation is there. Types of slavery, I've already said it's gender specific, and these are some of the pictures of forced labor and so on that you get with the gender specific slavery. Forced marriage is a very strange phenomenon. Girls from Vietnam particularly are being trafficked into other parts of Asia because they're very beautiful. Similarly, girls from Thailand will be trafficked into parts of India and elsewhere where there's a female problem. And there's a female problem in India particularly because there are not enough women of marriageable age, and there are not enough women of marriageable age because they've been aborted or left out to be infanticide at birth or slightly shortly after. Why? Because Indians, by and large, want male children, not female children. And that's largely to do with custom, tradition, the value of male and female, the fact that it's a patrilocal society. Women leave their birth family and travel to their husband's family on marriage and become the servant of the family, but also because of the dowry. And the dowry is paid to the bridegroom's family. And of course, if you've got 3 girls, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg from then onwards. The dowry is a massive, massive issue in India. So consequently, you have a female population that is not big enough to provide for the marrying needs of the male population. And the irony is, therefore, girls are trafficked into India in order to meet the deficiency in numbers of female in the population. And why don't they simply stop paying the dowry and get the abortion rate down? I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. But that's part of the situation we have with dowry and local cultures and customs. Looking at 106, this is the United Nations kind of report that comes out very regularly, every 2 or 3 years. And we're looking at where age and gender of victims has been detected, reported, and analysed. These are, if you like, proven cases. And for every one proven case, we don't know how many people slip by the net and are under the curtain. But we've got 106 countries that are looking at there. So if you look at the way what they're trafficked for, 77% of adult women are simply trafficked for sex. And they will end up in brothels. They will end up in some areas on the streets, but that's less likely, because the streets, they're likely to be picked up by police, and then the police can well investigate their background and all the rest of it. So they're most likely trafficked for sexual exploitation behind closed doors. 14% are trafficked for forced labor. That can be any kind of forced labor, but it's usually domestic servitude, kind of people, slaves in families where they want people to do servant work, but it's actually and it could also have sexual services attached. And then other forms of exploitation. When you come on to adult men, again, surprisingly, 17% are trafficked for sexual exploitation. So there's an increasing appetite for men, adult men who are providing sexual services. But by far the majority, it's a mirror image of the trafficking for sexual exploitation of women. The trafficking is for forced labor. Then you get this ghastly little area of trafficking for organ removal, which is often done in very shady circumstances without proper anaesthetic and with enormous risk to the man's life, because there's a huge profit in organs and organs for sale all over the place. And then 15% for other forms of exploitation that I've just looked at earlier, like criminal activity and militia and so on. When you look at the girls' victim figures, you find the sexual exploitation again is the highest one. And these girls can be very, very young. The evidence of girls trafficked as young as 5 and 6, right through to the age of teenage normality. 21% are trafficked for forced labor. This I found very extraordinary when I came across this. But the labor, again, is often slightly older trafficked girls working in domestic homes and so on. And then other forms of exploitation. That will include both of those. In fact, all 3 of those categories will include people being trafficked for brides for people who are needing to increase their sale. Boy victims, again, you have a similar figure as the others. Forced labor, sexual exploitation, and other forms of exploitation. What about the offenders? What about the perpetrators? What's going on? Now, it's very interesting because most crimes, and this is true of all international crimes, are committed by men. And this is the same is true here. 60% of the totals in 2018, and this big study, were male offenders, but 36% of the totals were female. Trafficking has got a higher ratio of women traffickers than women involved in most other forms of crime. I mean, over a third is really quite substantial. And where are they involved? Well, mostly in recruitment stage. And very often these will be, some of them will, of course, be very ruthless women who have realized there's huge profits in this. Others will be married to traffickers, and yet others will be themselves previously trafficked, and now they're finding themselves as older women able to traffic other people. So they will be recruiting, and partly because they're likely to be trusted more than men, and they will be recruiting in their own area or their own region, and they're particularly be recruiting women. They'll be looking for girls on the street, they'll be looking for girls in families, they'll be offering people job opportunities overseas and career, education and so on, and they will be believed. And it's once they get on the boat or get on the train or the form of transport, the truck, and get to the country where they're going, that they realize that this was a complete con. Their passports will be taken away. They'll be usually shut away for a period of a month or 2 months, and they will be broken in. And broken in means that they will be raped fairly constantly till they realize that this is going to be their way of life from then onwards. How they operate, I think the operation is understandable because you've got all of these, it's an industry. So you get a wide array of criminals and groups. They might include young males who are recruiting their younger schoolmates into sexual exploitation. They do include parents, sadly. Because the parents in poorer countries, where they have too many children and somebody comes along and says your daughter is particularly beautiful, we would like to give her an opportunity somewhere else. The parents usually know what's being offered, and if they need to, they will sell the daughter, and that's very uncommon. And it's a sad kind of sad response, but it happens. There's also parents who exploit their own children, of course, in begging, and this is not part of trafficking, but begging children then become trafficked to beg elsewhere. Urban gangs, structured transnational organized criminal groups, when they break open a trafficking group, it's amazing the people who are involved in it. The International Justice Mission has done this several times and looked at the way in which it operates, and it's very, very, very carefully organized, something akin almost to the way in which Hitler organized the whole transportation of Jewish people to the gas chambers and so on. Just the provision of stars, the provision of identification factors and so on, the rounding of people up, the transportation itself. All of these areas of exploitation are very, very carefully monitored. And then you have brokers negotiating children's work in rural villages, licensed multinational recruitments. You can get recruitment agencies and all the rest of it. So the operation is very carefully monitored. And of course, the organizations that are against this, what they're trying to do is put up posters, raise consciousness, get people to do something about it. But actually, you're up against very, very big money. I want us to look at the different kinds of processes that are going on then. So trafficking, oops, Daisy, let's move this again. The profiting traffickers. Traffickers really are selling for financial gain. I mean, there's no other way to describe what's going on. It's about money. It's all about money. There's no regard for humanity, no regard for human rights, no regard for personal health, nothing at all. They really just don't care. And so you get the many different kinds of groups that are involved at different stages of profit making. So those specialize in recruiting victims, so we've already talked about, and the amount they get depends on the ability to negotiate the price per victim. So you get some very, very clever entrepreneurs who are very clever negotiators who will nearly always promise more than they will actually pay in the long run, and there'll be some kind of back pay given certain circumstances. Then the monetary value, of course, is estimated depending on what type of exploitation. Vietnam little girls bring a high price because they are much desired in other Asian countries. They're seen as particularly beautiful, and a beautiful little girl will command a high price. At the exploitation phase as well, of course, profits are made from selling services to third parties. So you get profits then selling the women to pimps, to brothel owners, to people who are going to exploit them sexually in particular kinds of areas. Maybe in commerce, maybe as hostesses to businessmen and so on. So that's a third area where money changes hands, and then profits are made by those parties or syndicates who bought the exploited person by selling the labor, the sexual use, or the servitude as victims to the clients themselves. So in each of these areas, you've got stages of profit making. And women victims of trafficking can command many different sorts of prices to the people who are selling them. So look at the figure at the bottom, $36 as much as $23,500 we can be looking at in terms of their costs. I want now just to turn to the other area of trafficking that you can't ever eliminate from understanding what trafficking is about. And One study of prostituted women, that's prostitution. I really want to say there's often a fine line drawn between trafficking and prostitution, but very often, especially within the Christian church and elsewhere in society, we think of trafficking as being very wrong because it's taking people against their will and forcing them into slavery and into slave labor and prostitution and so on. But prostitution otherwise is a matter of choice. And sometimes it's called sex work, and sometimes it's seen as women choosing to sell their bodies in sexual kind of giving to somebody else. And it's an economic transaction. But actually, when you look at what's happening to prostituted women, and when you're looking at the way where they come from and the issues involved in prostitution, it's a very different pattern that emerges. So one study of prostituted women in 9 countries found that between 70 and 95% of the women were actually physically assaulted. They were bruised, they were battered, their hair was pulled out. Sometimes they lost teeth and so on. 60 to 75% were actually raped, and raped continuously. I mean, they would have clients who would rape them. That was the kind of sex they wanted, asphyxiating sex, rape sex, and so on. And 89% of the women told the researchers that they wanted to get out of prostitution. So the whole idea that prostitution is a choice, a career move, and something that women do knowing the dangers and knowing what it brings, and they're actually quite happy with their lot because they're earning good money from it, is a complete myth. In fact, the myth of choice overlooks the fact that most people who enter prostitution come from very damaged backgrounds, and they're entering a way of life that's exploitative and dangerous, and they again get stuck in it as much as if they were trafficked women. Very many prostitutes end up almost with the kind of limitations that trafficked women end up with as well. And the way in which the women are chosen, the elimination of identity, this is why I've shown you this picture. The women look the same, they have to look the same in certain areas of prostitution in certain countries because there's a model aspect, and it's kind of everything about it is humiliating and damaging. Research by the British Medical Journal found that in 3 UK countries, half the women in outdoor prostitution and a quarter of the women in indoor prostitution reported having been subject to violence by a sex buyer in the last 6 months. And there are many, many women now, particularly in the feminist groups, and many others who are wanting to eliminate the distinction between profiting, between sexual exploitation through trafficking and sexual exploitation through prostitution. This is one person who got out of prostitution, and this was what she said: if while having sex with somebody you feel repulsed by them, touching you, afraid of what they might do, degraded and humiliated by the sexual acts, hurt by the hateful words they're whispering in your ear, sore because he's for the 5th man you've had sex with today. Oops, a daisy, sorry. Exhausted from it all, traumatized, abused, the fact that you'll get a bit of cash at the end doesn't change anything. There's no invisible hand in the prostitution market that magically disappears the lived experience of sexual abuse. I'm very hot under the collar about this because I just think that the myth that we've been sold that prostitutes are operating through choice, and it's in their interest, therefore, to deregulate prostitution, to make it a free-for-all, because if you criminalize them, they have a worse time. There's an awful lot of arguments that we need to look at in that. I want to talk about Fiona Broadfoot, whom I know and I've met and worked with at a conference. And she was groomed by a boyfriend. She ended up on the street because of a damaged background. And effectively, this pimp trafficked her. He trafficked her, made her sell sex on the street, then trafficked her from Bradford to London. And she escaped that pimp, and she was picked up by another pimp and continued to be pimped on the streets and in brothels and so on. So her experience was one of being a trafficked prostitute who'd ended up in permanent prostitution. She has suffered violence, abuse, pimps and punters, regularly arrested by the police. And then look at this, whilst they exchanged friendly greetings with my pimp. As a result of police actions, by the age of 17, she got 39 convictions for soliciting and loitering. And she got out of prostitution in her early 20s. And because her cousin was killed, she was actually murdered, and that frightened Fiona so much she realized that this is how she could end up too, unless she got out of the whole thing as quickly as possible. What's interesting, of course, is what happened in the long run to Fiona. She's now in her late 40s, and she was encouraged by these women in this photograph, most of whom are radical feminists who think prostitution and trafficking ought to be completely eliminated and are working it, and we ought to know what we're up against and not be naive about this. They took her case to the High Court because she could never get a job, she couldn't go to university, she couldn't work with children. There's a whole range of things she could not do because of her prostitution convictions. And they asked the court to expunge them on the grounds that she was trafficked, she was a victim, she was not a person who'd chosen this as a way of life. And the High Court didn't know what to do about it. But 2 or 3 weeks later, they came back and did expunge her convictions. And that's opened the door for a lot of other women to exit prostitution and to have a new start and do it again. This is one of the women's. This is what one of the women said when she was looking. Cheerleaders of porn brothels, porn sets, and strip clubs would have us believe that the sex trade levitates above the level of social values and cultural belief, but no one can opt out of its effects. A market in sexual exploitation, accepted and tolerated, influences who we all are as individuals and who we are as a people. They're saying it's so disrespectful to women. Okay, then let's just finish with the economic transaction model and then look at what some Christians are doing. The economic transaction model is very simple. It says that governments should leave consenting adults to do what they want, who wish to buy and sell sex to do it, as long as they do it safely and privately, online or anywhere else. I ran out of the quotation there. Their argument then is that this is an economic transaction between two parties, some of whom buy and some of whom sell sex. And even if it's trafficked, it's still an economic transaction of some kind or another. And therefore, we ought to be regulating economic transactions, but minimally, but only when there's no consent involved. The big issue of what constitutes consent, of course, is a massive one. What's wrong with the model? It's wrong as every other model that we get like this. Economics presented as neutral, merely as an economic transaction, demand supply, completely ignores the moral and ethical underpinnings. Human beings are made into commodities, they're made into things, they're turned into labor machines, leisure accessories. It completely ignores the violation of identity, freedom, choice, ignores the ethics of power and economic power. And that's what is behind it all. And then the relationships between people become distorted. It's about economic ownership and profit making. It's about slavery. And unless we actually are honest enough to admit all of this and face it, we're never going to change the whole pattern of trafficking and exploitation. Two final bits of word. A war and conflict increases the vulnerability of traffic potential and people who are likely to be traffic victims. War probably opens the door, including, I have to say, refugee camps and transit camps and internment and displaced person camps. An awful lot of trafficking goes on in those camps. People go in and pick up people, often again young girls, offering them lucrative careers outside the camp. And of course, who doesn't want to escape an internment camp, which is like a little city, but without any of the infrastructure, without any of the policing, without any of the things that cities have in order to make them civilized places. These are horrendous camps, and women are trafficked in these camps. And the whole of war is a kind of minefield for increasing the vulnerability of trafficked people. And then the pandemics, we've got issues here that we need to do. I want to just finish then quickly by running through some of the things that are happening beyond the streets as an organization I've been involved with for many years now, doing fabulous work with trafficked women, but also with prostituted women, in a way of befriending them, just helping, standing alongside them, helping them medically, helping them emotionally, and sharing the gospel with them. The whole aim is to get the trust of women, not so that they can be exploited spiritually, but so that they can find that they are loved by other people and that they can help them to exit prostitution. The aim of Beyond the Streets is to get women out of prostitution, but to do so in their time when they're able to actually make a living outside it. And the Beyond the Streets is also looking particularly at the way in which trafficked women end up on our streets in the UK. This is one of the posters we put out. We don't think that women should be ordered like a pizza. And this is one of the gatherings 3 or 4 years ago before lockdown. Look at the age of the women involved in this. All of these women are in different areas of working with trafficked or prostituted women across the country. This was one of our conferences. We had to close the conference list at 350. That meant we couldn't allow different groups who are working with these trafficked people and prostituted people more than 4 delegates to the conference. I mean, can you imagine that, closing the list at 350 because 700 want to come? And the commitment of these girls is amazing. These young women who are working, and young men, there are men involved in the movement as well. Really, really tremendous. IGM, the International Justice Movement, of course, we know about, operates wonderfully in Canada. And there's lots and lots of others, and I haven't got time to go into them all. And I haven't got the other slides with me too. Okay, that's pretty much all I want to say. I don't know whether there's time for questions or what.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That's wonderful and so insightful. Huge amount to get to grips with there. And I know we'll all want to look back at your words and your presentation after the conference when we put it up onto YouTube. So we do have a few questions. I don't know whether you'll be able to answer all of these, but we'll give you a good try. So first of all, what % of offenders are successfully prosecuted?
We have no idea because we just don't know how many offenders there are globally. It's a tiny, tiny percentage. And the ones who are prosecuted are usually the ones who somehow who have been targeted for quite a long time by fraud squads and by people who are looking especially at international trafficking. So I couldn't even hazard a guess. I don't think anybody can tell you that, but it probably is fewer than 10%.
Right, that's an incredibly small amount, isn't it? Which illustrates the complexity of this whole issue,
because
I guess.
That would of course would include all the people at all the different levels of trafficking. You know, whether they're recruiting or whether they're just providing false documents and so on. It's a massive industry.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got another question. Are there Christian organisations we can support who are working at the highest level on legislation?
Yes, I mean the advocacy thing happens in each country, and almost every country you've got groups of Christians, often connected with law as a profession, who are working to tighten the laws up in that particular country. Now, I can't go through all the ones that I know it would take forever, but there are Christian organizations, but also there are multi-faith organizations and humanitarian organizations that Christians are very involved in. And so if you can't set up your own Christian organization, it's wonderful to be involved in organizations that are run by others and add a Christian voice to that. But yes, I think advocacy, challenging the law, trying to tighten the law, and then, of course, more important, implementing the blooming law, because you can have all the laws you like, but if nobody's implementing them, and very, very often they're not implemented in many countries because the police turn a blind eye. That's one of the big issues too. So the implementation of the law is being fought at a different kind of level.
Thank you very much. You mentioned close to the beginning of your talk about the impact and the relevance of the internet with regard to probably every part of this terrible network and nexus of people trafficking. And I wondered, are there any points of connection where we as Christians can support work to press social media channels and other media channels to act on this issue, or is that just too difficult?
Well, regulation of social media has been a problem since social media started, and Christians, especially people like Andrew Grayson, who was very involved with BBC and spotted the rise of social media before most of us, started at the very beginning saying this must be regulated, and we must have legal groups working hard for this in the UK to make sure that whatever's happening on an international scale doesn't wreck us. Sorry, Patricia, what you were saying?
Sorry, it's okay. I was just trying to read another question.
Oh, right.
Carry on.
So it does, I can't remember what I was saying. So yes, Andrew Grayson was saying that it needs to be regulated from the very start. And of course, it's not being regulated. And so we leave it for people like the head of Facebook or all of the other organizations to do the regulating, and then we moan when it's not regulated. It's a very, very insidious social media. It's a dangerous medium, really dangerous medium altogether. In terms of what Christians do, we start where we are. Before we start trying to press for law and regulation, we start by helping Christian families and Christian parents and alerting the issues in our Christian churches to the fact that, do you know what your child is doing on the internet? Do you know what your child is doing on their mobile phone? Why does your child of 9 need a mobile phone, a smartphone, where they can be got by anybody who actually can find a way of hacking into their phone? That's where we start. We start in our own ground, because there's so much research now done by people who are looking at the ways in which young children, especially girls, are being groomed on the internet, and parents don't know a thing about it. I went to a safeguarding conference where I was giving a Christian talk at a secular safeguarding conference, and the woman who'd done a research for the last 3 years was absolutely horrifying details as to what parents did not know about their children being groomed on the internet. And all kinds of ways in which we all know the stories about the man who is really 45 and pretending to be a teenage boy who just wants to get to know a girl and so on. And eventually she's caught into the whole network. But there's layers and layers of it going on. So I think regulation is a must, but how we get to the regulation, we've got to make sure that everybody's conscious is raised before we even begin to go in that direction.
Yeah, so you've spoken as consciousness raising as one kind of intervention, and also knowing about what our children are doing. As Christians, we obviously believe that intervention is necessary. What advice would you give to anyone about where to begin to kind of attack the problem more generally?
Well, that was the advice I've just given, to start where you are, to start with the people you know, and that's people in your own family. But then I think to be wizened up as to what's going on in your own community. If you, and especially in urban areas where people are behind closed doors, you don't know what's going on. And I mean, many times people have made convictions and people have been arrested because of neighbours have actually reported on neighbours saying, we think there's something very fishy and suspicious going on next door. And then they have described things. So keeping your eyes and ears open. How many people live next door? Where did the people come from? What's going on? Are there young women there who are coming and going? Are there a lot of men suddenly appearing at the door of certain kinds of ages, and what's going on? So I think that the level of monitoring, even in our neighborhoods, shouldn't be just left to the police. We should all be doing that. And I think Christians have responsibility as well. And then befriending people that you think might well be trafficked and might well be in a vulnerable position in our own culture and in our own communities, because they will be there.
Yes, thank you. Lots to be aware of and lots to do if we see it. I come to the end of the questions I've received in the chat. Just before we move on to hear from Tim Nelson, does anybody else have a question or a comment that they would like to raise for Elaine? And if so, please can you unmute yourself. I'm trying to see everybody on screen. I'm not quite able to see everyone, but has anybody got their hand up?
I'd like to ask Roy Squires.
Oh, Roy, where are you?
I'm here.
Can't see you.
No, there's something wrong with the camera. I've not.
Okay.
I tried fixing it, but it's not worked. I'm still as good looking as ever, anyway. Who is selling the myth of prostitution to whom?
Well, the pimps are selling it, the brothel owners are selling it, the men who have a lot of money and want to spend it on prostitutes are selling it, and the people who are habitual sexual perverters, really, and enjoying the profits of sex abuse are selling it. And it's big. There's an awful lot of money going on to actually providing making sure that the prostitution trade is not undercut by those of us who want to see different kind of regulation. So it's money behind it always. It's always money, and people making a lot of it out of women's backs. The women who are opposing that, of course, don't have money. People like Julie Bindel, who is one of the arch radical feminists, has no money at all. She just writes books, and she travels, and she's traveled the world, and she's got this brilliant book called The Pimping of Prostitution. And I mean, her language is crude. I would love to quote from her, but I can't really, because not in public. And I love this woman, even though I couldn't bear to be in the same room as her, probably, or she couldn't bear to be in the same room as me, because we're so poles apart. But she's really, her understanding of what we're up against is second to none, because she's been around the world talking to prostitutes everywhere, looking at the structures, looking at the legal structures, the enforcement of the law, and so on, and looking at the myth that Roy has just outlined, that that prostitution is a great idea, and it's something that women are choosing freely to do from their own longing and desire. I had debated once with a career prostitute. I was talking in a university setting, and this woman was very distressed and told me I was demeaning her, and because I was even using the word prostitute. She was a sex worker. She'd chosen the sex worker. It was her career, and would I please apologize? And I said effectively that I didn't believe it was a career, because if it was a career, why weren't we sending career advisors into our schools saying, look, don't forget, you can also consider prostitution alongside human resources and nursing and IT and so on. And this wasn't happening. And I didn't believe that she'd gone through the whole list of things. Well, we did have a disagreement, but in the end, I said, well, can we just agree that for every 10 of you, there are 10,000 women in prostitution who don't want to be there? And we could agree on that. So at least we found something that was better. I think that the myth, I mean, and there are big male groups and female groups too, trying to perpetuate the myth. The French had a group called Hands Off My Tart, which is anything but kind of courteous towards women in prostitution. And I think it's something that and even Amnesty International have taken the line that it's better to deregulate and it's better not to criminalize the women. But the model I like is the Nordic model. I mean, not like, but prefer, where you don't criminalize women, you don't make it illegal to sell sex, you make it illegal to buy sex. And that really sorts out the problem, because then you're attacking the person who's actually keeping the industry going. And in Sweden, places where it's been, where this is the law, there has been, Sweden has known a decline in trafficking, because the demand has fallen, because the people who are buying the demand or setting the demand are likely to be imprisoned. So it does have consequences.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And we'll draw it to a close there, if we may, just with a comment by somebody who's on the call today. Angered, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, but Angered is chair of the Joanna Project in Leeds, yes, and also regional lead for Tender, West Yorkshire. And she's saying that they run workshops in schools on healthy relationships, helping young people spot the signs of unhealthy relationships, including grooming. And there's a link there, www.tender.org.uk. So if anyone's interested in finding out more about that, please do have a look at their website. And also we will have Jackie Hurd, who is the director of the Joanna Project, online with us at Iron Sharpens Iron, which is a follow-up meeting to this conference on the last Friday in March. And I'm sure that Jackie will talk more about this kind of preventional and advocacy work as well when she talks about the Joanna Project, which works with street women and what they do. So
Patricia,
thank you so much for that. And we'll draw to a close very soon, if you may, to move on.
Patricia, can I just mention something? Because
yes,
I wanted to mention the Joanna Project. In fact, I have slides. I would have put them up, but I didn't have their permission to do that, and it was too late to get their permission. So I'm really glad that Jackie has been in touch and that you've heard from them. They are a wonderful outfit, doing incredible work. And having visited the Joanna House myself and been so impressed by all that's going on in the Leeds direction there, and their love for the women. It's a friendship campaign. It's a campaign where they're befriending women and providing a safe place for them to be and to shower and to enjoy coffee and so on. And it really is costly for those women to do that, to be involved in Joanna House. So I'm thrilled that she's written in, because it was sad that I wasn't able to put the slides up because I didn't have their permission. I hadn't sought it, so it would be wrong to have done it without that. But please do support them if you can.
Thank you so much for that, Elaine, and thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, for the enormous amount of input, research, effort that went into giving us that. We so appreciate you, and I know that we'll be looking back on that. And also, you haven't plugged your own books, but Elaine has written some wonderful books, including most recently Cries Across Humanity.
Scars Across Humanity.
Sorry, Scars Across Humanity, which goes so much further into everything that she's spoken about this morning. So I do encourage you to get hold of that and to read that. So thank you again. And we're going to move on now to hear from Tim Nelson, Chief Exec of Hope for Justice. And I'm going to invite my good friend Cal Bailey, who is the Chair of Trustees for TFN, to come and introduce Tim for us. So Cal, I'm hoping that you're there somewhere and that you can unmute yourself and speak to us now.
Hi, it's Cal here. I'm waving if you can't detect where I am on the screen. Yes, we're in Leeds, and Thinking Faith Network is originally a Yorkshire-based organisation. We're going much broader now, and it's a delight to have today and to welcome you. Thank you, Patricia, for organising this. So I'm going to introduce Tim, who is also on the screen. Give us a wave if you would, Tim. Tim has connections with Yorkshire. I think he was at university in Bradford. He worked for the NatWest Bank, but while I think it was in quite early days that he and some friends at a church launched Hope for Justice. And I was at a Christian meeting in Leeds on Wednesday evening and mentioned this event. And several of them said, oh, we know Hope for Justice, they're a great organisation. And Tim left NatWest Bank and was employed by Hope for Justice. I think he ceased being a trustee at that point to keep proper governance. And he's now the chief executive of the organisation. And Tim, I'm going to hand over to you. And thank you very much for joining us. Tim.
Thanks so much, everybody, and for giving up Saturday morning to be on with us. I just so appreciate everybody's time. I want to thank Elaine for your presentation as well. I find it every time someone speaks who provides additional information, I always end up writing some notes. So hopefully everybody took notes and can understand the importance of understanding this issue going forward. And I also want to thank Cal for introducing me and for Patricia for the invitation and helping to coordinate today. I've got a presentation which I'll try and share now. Hopefully it'll come through very shortly. If you can see that, just give me a thumbs up and we'll see if I can move forward. Yep, I've got a couple of people telling me that they can see it. So let me see if I can move through and get this working. Yeah. Okay. So building upon what Elaine had shared, and the real end of her presentation, we've been looking at this issue across the board. The issue of using prostitutes. It's estimated something like 1 in 10 men in the UK will use a prostitute at some point in time during their life. And I think that's an important piece of information for you to be aware of, because that's 1 in 10 across the UK. That's not 1 in 10 in a developing country. That's here and now. So if you're part of a faith-based community, if you're attending a church, the likelihood is that that statistic may be slightly less in the church, but actually there'll be a good portion of people that will have at some point in time used a prostitute. If you look at the estimates to the extent of this problem globally, it's estimated that there are 40.3 million people held across all the areas that Elaine has touched on. If you look at this as a commercial crime, the latest estimates are that it's somewhere in the region of $150 billion that it generates. Now, that $150 billion is, when you put it into context, it makes it the second highest grossing serious and organized crime globally, just after drug trafficking. And what makes it even more horrible to deal with or to think about is the reality that, you can sell a kilo of cocaine once, but you can sell a person time after time after time. And if you understand that there are 40.3 million people estimated to be in all forms of slavery globally, the sad reality is, based on figures that we got from the Ambassador Richmond, who was head of the US's efforts in the Trafficking in Persons report, the sum total between 2019 and 2020 of all of the organizations working in this area is that there were only 118,932 individuals identified. Now, from a context point of view, if you look at the UK, we have a national referral mechanism where people who have hit certain indicators to show that they would be a victim of modern slavery or human trafficking would be entered. Last year, there were 10,613 individuals who were identified and brought into the national referral mechanism. Now, the Salvation Army has the government contract, and they place those individuals into accommodation and give them the care that they need to, and help to try and understand the trauma that those individuals have been through. But the reality is prosecutions are incredibly low and incredibly complex. As it was asked earlier about prosecutions globally, to give you some context of this, there was a report that came out this week showing in the last 7 years, there were somewhere in the region of 20,000 children that had been brought into what's called county lines, individuals who have been trafficked to provide drugs and move drugs from city to city just in the UK. But 20,000 and only 7 individuals have been prosecuted in this area. If you look across the last 7 years in the UK, Hope for Justice have been responsible by working through providing our independent modern slavery advocates to work alongside victims. Hope for Justice have been able to help nearly 30% of all prosecutions that have happened in this area just in the UK. Now, for Hope for Justice, we are an organisation that has been set up to bring an end to modern slavery. As Cal said, I got involved in this active part of a local church, and I heard about this issue when I found myself in Los Angeles. And I was out for dinner with a friend, and he brought a friend along with him. And this friend was on the phone to Condoleezza Rice, who was working for the Bush administration. And she was had downgraded India on the human trafficking register. And this chap who was with me was arguing that he'd been in Mumbai the week before. This is 2007. And he'd seen girls in cages that were being shipped all over India. And his challenge to me was, you call yourself a Christian. You've read the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. What are you going to do to be the hands and feet of Christ? He said, I guarantee they might not be using cages in your city where you're at. And I was based in Bradford, and the challenge to me was, it's going on in my city. And he said, yes, it's going on in your city. And I guarantee there are people tonight who are crying themselves to sleep, praying to a God to move in this area. And God's waiting for you and others to take action. So I came back to the UK, and I couldn't shake this issue. I was up nights. I couldn't sleep about it. I spoke to pretty much everybody I knew, and a friend of mine, Chris, who ran a car dealership group, introduced me to Ben Cooley, Robin Marion White, and a number of others who were considering putting on an event to tell the church about this issue. So 11 months after we got together, we formed Hope for Justice. We've held our first event. We hired the NEC in Birmingham. We managed to get 5,884 people to come. And when we set up Hope for Justice, we thought we might be a conduit to send money abroad to other organizations. But when we started to realize that the problem was at home and we needed to deal with it first. So I managed to convince my pastors to let us use some space in our church buildings. We took on the former divisional commander for West Yorkshire, and we set up our first investigative hub. And in that first year of operation, if I can set a context for you, the entire police force across England and Wales had run an operation called Pentameter 1, and they'd rescued 88 victims, which was primarily from knocking the doors of brothels and finding women in sexual exploitation. We set up in West Yorkshire, formed a team, brought on former police officers, trainers, social workers. We would go out into the community. And in our first year of operation, we rescued 110 individuals. In that year, the youngest victim was just 3 months old, trafficked for sexual exploitation. The oldest victim was 58 years old, trafficked for labour trafficking. And as part of that, we uncovered a case with Cozy Sleep, who were a bed manufacturer in Huddersfield, where we rescued 33 individuals, Hungarian nationals, that were making beds for two of the largest retailers in the UK. It hit the headlines because as the case went through the courts, it was the first occurrence of slavery within the supply chain of a major multinational in this country. And under the legislation that was brought forward in 2015, it really had helped to address the issues that we were finding within slavery within the supply chain of major multinational businesses. But for Hope for Justice, when we set up, we couldn't have dreamed to where we would be by this stage, and covering all of these core areas where we want to prevent exploitation, rescue victims, restore lives, and see a reformation of society. Currently now operate in 8 countries across the world. We're identifying so many individuals. Just in the last 12 months, we identified 4,844 survivors that we helped through our outreach, rescue, and aftercare program. Across the last 12 months, we've been able to train 166,000 individuals through the various events that we've done on a global basis. It's become a lot more difficult because of the pandemic, but we've tried to press in and do more than we possibly can. And through that work, we've now been able to reach out and help 192,000 individuals reach through our work. If we look at the last year in terms of the rescue numbers, we've been able to see 1,810 individual children that we've been able to help through our centres. We call them lighthouses because we believe they should bring them as a ship would be brought safe to shore, children should be brought safe home. We believe that children belong in families, and where parents have not been complicit in it, we bring them back to their families. So we've had 915 children that we've been able to bring back safely to their own families. Just in the last 18 months, we had one of those victims that we brought back in Uganda, and the parents had actually conducted a funeral service for the individual child that we brought back. The lives of these individuals are horrific, and some of the elements that Elaine went into of how children have been exploited, the sheer cost that the children can be sold for. In countries like Vietnam, we know that we can identify and find children where you can buy an under 5-year-old for under $250 and they'll dispose of the body afterwards. This is a stark reality of the world in which we live, that men, women, and children can be bought and sold. But as we look at it, we have to be able to see that we have power and we can make a substantive difference. I've got an image of a statue that this image is of a statue that's found in a place called Clifton House in Belfast. And this summer, I had the opportunity of traveling to Belfast. We've had another organisation merge into us in Northern Ireland. In the last 13 years, we've had 7 organisations that have really helped bring scale and skills to us across the board. And I hadn't heard of this lady before, but I wanted to tell you her story before I can tell you some of the areas, perhaps across your world, where you can make an impact. This is a lady called Mary Ann McCracken. And for the majority of people on this call, you will not have heard of her. You may have heard of the likes of William Wilberforce, But for Mary Ann McCracken, she was born in the 1700s, born to a Presbyterian family. Her dad set up one of the mills in Belfast. He was part of the founding board of Clifton House, which was set up for the impoverished children of Belfast. At that time, it was built to provide food and help and security for 60 individual children. Within 6 months, there were over 400 children that were being provided for. But she grew up in that backdrop. But in the 1700s, she had no right to own property. She had no right to vote. She had no rights at all. But Mary Ann led a movement of women because she was so touched by what she saw with the slave ships coming into Belfast. She was able to work with men connected to Clifton House to lead a movement so that Belfast would be the first slave port where they would not allow slave ships to enter. So even though Belfast's wealth had been built off the back of the slave trade, in fact, at one stage, the most wealthy person in New York came from Belfast, built on the back of slave ships coming through. But she was able to see that banned. In fact, she led a movement of women that even before fair trade had even been thought about, she banned those individuals from, or abstained from being able to take sugar into their diet, because sugarcane had been the byproduct of the slave trade going into so many communities off the back of the slave trade. In fact, when the Abolition Act happened and Abraham Lincoln banned slavery in the US, for Irish men and women who would go and emigrate to America, she would stand on the shore and she would almost rugby tackle people. It was defined that she would literally rugby tackle women and men when she was in her 70s, to try and ensure that those individuals would go to their relevant states, meet with their congressmen, and ensure that they had enacted the anti-slavery legislation that Abraham Lincoln had passed. You see, I think every person who is living has an opportunity to do something about this, that you have more power than you realize. And when you realize that as Christians, we aren't meant to live a passive life. We're meant to live a life that could encourage us to reach out and do more. That if we truly believe in who Jesus is, and we believe the difference that we're called to bring, that we should not stay silent and we should realize the power that we have. And like Mary Ann, even though we've not been given the assignment legally, and we've not been officially enacted by politicians to take that cause, we should start to realize that we have power beyond measure. And this problem that we have is not far away from us. It affects every single person. We believe that somewhere between 70 and 80% of all businesses globally have some form of modern slavery within their supply chains. We're finding that because we're seeing the enormity of the problem that we see on a global basis. And I wanted to come through some commodity groups, some things that might shock you as you're going through, but I wanted to talk about them because I wanted to bring the reality of some groups and some commodities to you so that you can see how close this is to you. So I don't know, for any men on here who are used to wearing shimmer makeup, I know that might be something that you've got up on a Saturday and you're thinking, maybe I just need to put that extra bit of makeup on my face. But most makeup that provides that shimmer effect uses a product called mica, and it's dug in the ground. When we see that children as young as 5 are used in mica mining and forced into being able to do that, in places like Tajikistan in India, where 60% of all mica comes from, we're starting to realize that actually you might want that effect, but how many people have been enslaved to ensure that you can have that effect? How many people are exploited to try and give you that look and that feel? It starts to make you think differently about the products and services that you use. But mica isn't just used in makeup. It's also used in, you might have a vehicle with a pearlescent effect of paint that is painted with. You might end up finding that mica is used in some toothpaste manufacturing. It's used across the board in products and services that you will use on an everyday basis. If I can take you to solar panels, you know, with COP26 that passed recently, you might assume that solar panels are an amazing opportunity to help reduce the CO2 production that we have globally. It might help to help the environment. I'm all about making sure that we as Christians take responsibility and ensure that we live in a world that is set for our children. But the sad reality is that now somewhere in the region of 45% of all solar panels that are produced in Xinjiang, and they're produced by the Uyghur population. In fact, it has been said now that it's very difficult in Europe to buy a solar panel unless it's been made by a slave in Xinjiang. And I think we should all think hard about the reality that we want to have, and that we shouldn't want to have a dream of living in a world where CO2 productions are less, but made off the back of the reality of how many people are enslaved to ensure it can happen. We might think about electric vehicles. And, you know, I'm sure Elon Musk and Tesla may have seen the panorama program that was produced this week and went out talking about electric vehicles and the reality of components that are needed within it. But what you might not know is that there's a product called cobalt, and it's essential in all electric vehicles. In fact, if you go in beyond this, it's actually used by petrochemical companies. If you go into the subject of cobalt, you might want to do some more research on it. But what you will see is that this cobalt mining is produced by people who are in exploited circumstances. It's produced by people who find themselves in horrendous situations. Many of us have one of these, a mobile phone. Steve Jobs did a great job in producing an amazing product called an iPhone. But the reality is, for your iPhone to work, it only functions because there's cobalt in it. The battery that you have in your mobile phone has cobalt in it. You might not have realized, but there is a very high chance that the cobalt that is found in your battery was mined in the DRC by forced labor. It's impossible actually for you to know whether it was or not, because these commodity groups are the gangs that are controlling these, that are bringing them into the supply chains of major multinational businesses. They are working very hard to ensure that you don't know whether something is good or something is bad. And it's very, very difficult. You know, you might be overwhelmed by even what I'm saying to you at this moment in time, that there are products and services around your home today that I would guarantee have been made at some level on the back of slave labor. If you look at it, even just the reality of granite, it's impossible now for you to get granite production unless it's been made off the back of slave labor. Granite is commonly sourced in places like India. And so whenever you're thinking about that next kitchen you might get, or that loved one who passes away and you want to have a tombstone to remember them, I can tell you about the fact that we've been to quarries in places in India where there are 30,000 families who are debt bonded to the quarry, not able to leave, held in horrendous circumstances, children born into families not able to leave, just so you can have that lovely granite worktop to your kitchen. And I don't want anyone to be living in shame if you've got a great granite worktop or you've got that latest iPhone. I don't want anyone to feel that there's condemnation in this, but I do want to make sure that you are educated around this. You know, the reality of what I've talked about in businesses, governments are trying to deal with, and legislation is being brought through across the board. I produced this little document that shows you a little bit of some of the legislation that's been brought through. Originally, many of you remember Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was governor in California, brought forward a piece of legislation, the Transparency and Supply Chain Act. And it has literally been the precursor to what we brought in 2015 in the UK as the Modern Slavery Bill. And the individuals who worked on that under Theresa May's government actually brought through something that started to make companies responsible for what they were doing within their supply chain. In fact, within their financial accounts, every major businesses that turns over 36 million or more has to have a statement that says what they're doing to remove slavery from their supply chains. In fact, recently we've seen that legislation beefed up. 3 weeks ago, I was in Munich, because there are a number of businesses that are getting very concerned because legislation has been passed that will be enacted in 2023 that will now carry a 2% mandatory potential fine of global turnover for businesses that are found to be complicit to have slavery within their supply chain, or 800,000 euros. The reality is, working with the OSCE, who work with 57 governments, there are 26 more governments that are looking to bring on legislation that passes the responsibility of what people are doing within their supply chains onto the individual. Ourselves at Hope for Justice, we have a policy and legal department, and we're advocating on this across the board. Many other organizations are doing so. And in fact, recently, because of the new Immigration and Borders Bill that's coming through in the UK, we joined with 107 other organizations, so 108 organizations in total, to send a letter to the Home Secretary and to the government to say that the legislation itself at this moment in time will criminalize trafficking victims in the UK. In fact, it is not good. It is, in fact, rolling back at least 15 to 20 years of legislation. We had worked so hard to separate the issue of smuggling from the issue of trafficking, but this legislation effectively says that every single person who's in this country illegally is a criminal. And we want to work harder to try and ensure that we stand up against this. And there is, if anyone goes on social media, want to go on our website, we've been part of creating a letter that we would encourage you to all send to your MPs. I think when we realize that we have the power to start asking questions and start to demand that our government does not do certain things, many governments are now starting to see that legislation change, and we would advocate to see more. Our team in the US have been working on the update of the Frederick Douglass bill, which has gone to the House and hopefully will pass through the House in America by January. We've had 12 other senators who join on and co-sponsored the bill. But it leads to the biggest legislative change in the last 20 years around modern slavery for America. It will start to make sure that federal contracts in America have to take into consideration what work has been done by businesses to remove slavery from their supply chain. We're seeing governments like the US invoke orders that stop commodities coming into America that they know have been made off the back of slave labor. And there is discussion that von der Leyen has brought in Europe, that she's looking to have these withhold release orders to stop products coming into Europe as well. And we've been encouraging, I wrote to the Prime Minister recently to ask him to bring forward legislation to ensure that withhold release orders can also be brought into the UK to stop slave labour coming into commodities that we buy here. And at Hope for Justice, one of the things that we set up in 2018 was what we call Slave Free Alliance. Now, it's a wholly owned subsidiary of Hope for Justice. Any profits that are made off it are used by Hope for Justice to try and ensure that more is done to try and eradicate modern slavery, human trafficking globally. We have just over now 100 businesses that have used our services. We've got 95 current members, of that, 10 of which are FTSE 100 members. We're starting to see that this issue is a real problem for major multinational businesses. For those companies, we're working with them to provide a thought-through professional approach. In fact, I would want to touch on this, that the vision of wanting to live in a world free from slavery can sometimes be a bit of a curse, a bit like it was for Joseph whenever he was given the vision that he brought to Pharaoh. You see, that vision that was given to Joseph actually saw him sold into slavery, saw him put into prison, but it was the plan that God gave him, the thought-through plan that God blessed, that actually provided help and support for so many through a time of famine. And I think that's what we as Christians are called to bring, a thought-through professional approach. We're called to not kiss our brains goodbye, but we're called to actually make a bigger difference and to realize that when we start to speak about things, we have the authority of heaven that comes behind us to ensure that we help as many people as possible, so that when we go to businesses and say that we want to live in a world free from slavery, it starts to stand up and speak out. We have at Hope for Justice created an analogy. Effectively, we want to celebrate what we want to replicate. When we set up Hope for Justice at the beginning, we couldn't tell people about the rescues that we were having across the UK. You know, we now work with just over 70% of the police authority across the whole of the United Kingdom. And we try and help support police along investigations. We provide outreach workers who build bridges of trust. Like Elaine has said, rescue isn't an event, it's a process. And we need to build that bridge of trust to ensure that people can find freedom. Across our outreach workers in the UK, we cover 23 spoken languages because we know that there are lots of people who are brought to this country, lots of people who are in this country who are enslaved, lots of people who find themselves exploited in horrendous circumstances. But we wanted to try and tell people that everything is not dark. We have power and we can do something about this. And when we started, when Twitter came out at the beginning, It was about 18 months before we set up Hope for Justice, and we wanted to tell people about the rescues that we were having, but we couldn't say, hey, we've had a rescue in this city or this area, because it could potentially compromise investigations and the prosecutions that were happening. But when we started to realize that we could do something, and it was something to be celebrated. And we used to have this phrase that we said it was time to drink champagne and dance on the tables. And I'm not making any form of buy-in to alcohol drinking. I myself don't drink, but we used to have individuals who sent bottles to us to celebrate the moment. And we used to have this process where anytime we had someone rescued, we would open a bottle of champagne and toast, or open a bottle of fizzy pop, or in the church world, I think that champagne's been replaced by Schlur. And we used to put a tag around it with the individual's name that was rescued on that day. And we used to look at them, and they weren't just a moment in time. They were something that actually celebrated the moment of that person's finding rescue. But we started to rescue a lot more, and certainly we had a case in 2015 in the West Midlands area through Operation Fort, where we initially identified 53 victims. The police went on to say it was over 400 victims that we were able to rescue. That case itself, actually, the last 3 prosecuted were only prosecuted in September. It took from 2015, supporting those 93 individuals who gave evidence in that case. It took till 2021 in September for the last 3 people to be extradited and prosecuted in that case, the largest case in European history. But we couldn't suddenly have so many bottles opened. When you see 400 people rescued, you couldn't be opening 400 bottles. Well, we as a Christian organization couldn't do that. But what we came up with a concept of when we went to, there was across our program in Cambodia, there was a lady called Sophia. And at the age of 13, she was trafficked to work on a building site during the day. And the traffickers realized that they could make more money by selling her as a prostitute in the evening. It was really, really harsh, and her mother was involved in selling her. But when we went across and saw the case files, it showed that she was held in thick chains with a large padlock. And when we talked about the fact that this was so unusual for what we would see, we said that image of an open padlock and the name and the year that they were rescued is a real provocation for what has happened. So we created this freedom wall. And every year we get the opportunity to add more people to it across of our centres, and we work with businesses, and they start to put these freedom walls into their businesses to start to say about what they are doing to support Hope for Justice and the work that we're doing by partnering on Slave Free Alliance, or supporting our work by giving financially to enable it to happen. They partner and see rescues, and we see these padlocks opened. We see individuals find freedom. And, you know, we've had thousands and thousands and thousands of individuals find freedom through this way. In the last 7 years alone, we've had 5,700 children that we've been able to rescue from exploitation and modern slavery and find freedom. And this is something that we need to celebrate. This is something that we need to see more of, because those figures of how many people are rescued across all organizations that we work in partnership with is not enough. We are not free until every single person is free. But you might ask yourself today, what can you do to make a bigger difference? The first thing I would say is the decisions that you make on an everyday basis matter. Where you buy from, the supermarkets that you go to. It's complex for all of these companies. Like for one major supermarket that we're working with at the moment, they've got 70,000 first-tier suppliers that supply into them. It's complex, but a complicated problem needs a solution. And we would encourage all businesses that they need to do more on this issue. We say that it's not good enough for them to be passive on this, and there should be an update to the modern slavery legislation in the UK that should come through this next year. We hope that it starts to bring with it criminal liability for CEOs, so that company directors have to not just turn a blind eye to this, they have to look into this, and they have to want to do more. We believe they should mirror what Germany has done in bringing forth legislation that carries some very big penalties if they're not prepared to investigate it properly. When you start to ask questions, companies start to take notice. So I'd encourage you to, when you're thinking about making a purchase, or if there's a company that you shop from regularly, ask the question. Go on board, go on, have a look at their financial accounts and see what they're doing. A tick box exercise will not cut it. Most companies, that's all they do. So they try and deflect the issue and send to their suppliers, are you doing enough on this issue? Tick this box. That's what most companies do. In fact, most companies that supply products from places like China, there's a thing called the Shenzhen Fair, which most people wouldn't know about. But there's a week in the year where buyers are invited to go to Shenzhen to be able to look at all products and services that are made by Chinese factories. For major companies in the UK, they attend that fair. In fact, if you were to walk around every booth that's on there, it would take you a full 7 days walking for 14 hours to look at every single booth. This is absolutely massive. But for most companies, that's as close as they get to the products and services and the manufacturing that goes on for those companies. In fact, if you were a major multinational and you were thinking Christmas is coming up for 2022, I need to get in some more baubles, I might go to the Shenzhen Fair to say, I'll go to the booths that are selling baubles from manufacturing companies that manufacture baubles. And I'd point to the type of product I want, and I'd say I want 30,000 of those baubles. I want them in packs of 10, and I want them in blue, or I want them in red, or I want them in yellow. We're saying that's not enough. We're encouraging everyone to start asking more questions. The second thing that I would say is you have power within the fact that we are connected locally to government and we're connected nationally to government. You can go and meet with your MP. There are weekly hustings that take place where you can go and meet and talk about this as an issue and ask your local MP what more they are doing on this issue. I encourage you, with the new Immigration and Borders Bill, for you to check out, to read and understand what is happening about the impact of this and what it will mean. I put a post out earlier this week following the tragic deaths of the migrants crossing the English Sea. I think the horrendous nature of which individuals are being treated like commodities and passed from pillar to post. The sad reality is the amount of those vessels that have gone up have increased massively since we as a country stopped having visas where we would have low-skilled workers coming into the UK. When we said we're no longer going to have low-skilled workers coming into the UK, it's created major problems for multinational corporations. We no longer have enough people to work in our factories, to help pick products from our agricultural communities. It will lead to a massive increase in modern slavery, human trafficking, because those businesses will use recruitment companies and they will try and find individuals. But like Elaine spoke about with the issue of prostitution, when the demand is high and there isn't the individuals who want to be prostitutes and there aren't the individuals who want to work for minimum wage, it presents real problems for us. And I would encourage the government, and I would encourage you to encourage the government to do more on this issue. Look at what the scriptures say about welcoming the stranger. We're turning them away. Look at what it says about the reality of how we as Christians are meant to treat one another. I think it's abhorrent what's happening at this moment in time. And recently I've been meeting with government officials, I've been meeting with members of parliament and lords to literally talk about this as an issue. I don't have to do that alone. You can do that. You have the power to meet with your local MP, and you've got the power to start asking questions about what they're going to do. You can influence others to do the same. People always talk about the reality that we have is that we have time, we have treasure, and we have talent. So you have time to be able to ask and meet with your MP. If you're not able to meet with them personally, you can write to them. I would say to you, every time you write to an MP, they assume that it's the equivalent of 1,000 members of their constituency thinking the same. If you go and meet with your MP, they will think it's somewhere like 10,000 of their constituents may hold that same importance on this issue. If all of us did that as Christians, it would start to make a huge difference. Using our talent to ensure that some of you may be in businesses. You might be using products and services. You have the power to ask questions. I can tell you that there was an individual who spoke at a major at a church, and there was a lady from a multinational business that was literally the lowest level in that business. In 2012, when they heard about this issue, they went back to their boss, spoke to their boss's boss, spoke to their boss's boss about this issue, and that senior person conceded that the company should do something to raise money for this issue. I was invited to go and speak on this issue to that company. when I did, I went with that one of those original bottles with the name around, with the individual who needed to find freedom. And off the back of it, that company came on board. They've actually helped support our work since then, because one person who heard in a group of 20 thought, maybe I could do something to make a bigger difference. And then there's also your ability to use Treasure, the money that you have to be able to put direct. Hope for Justice is just one organization. There have been other organizations mentioned this morning, but I'd encourage you to give to this issue and to pray about this issue. If anyone wants to, we conduct a weekly prayer meeting on a Wednesday evening, and we encourage everyone to come on board. We have a faithful group of people in the UK who pray every single week about this issue, talking about the specifics of what this issue is. If you are part of a faith-based community and you want to receive prayer points on this issue, drop me an email. We would love to be able to help you. I give my email address freely. I ask everyone to contact me if you want to. I'll direct you to the right person and hopefully enable more of these things to go on. But I'll stop now and open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm personally stunned, actually. Find it difficult to talk after watching and listening all that you've shared this morning. It's inspiring, it's sobering, and as you say, it requires reflection and prayer as well as action. So I do have a couple of questions from people for you, and maybe others will come after and bring their own questions after your responses. So the first question I had was, do you ever personally feel overwhelmed by the suffering, by the scope and challenges of the work that you're tackling, and how do you deal with that?
Yes, on a regular basis. I think you've got to have skin like a rhino and a heart like a baby, because at one level you need to challenge people in positions of authority. You need to be sure of what you're doing, and you need to lead people in a way to make a bigger difference. The sad reality is Hope for Justice has been going for 13 years, and we're probably in the top 5 biggest organizations of our type globally now, working across the countries that we do, but we're a drop in the ocean of where the problem is. I go to bed regularly thinking about the individuals who find themselves enslaved. We've been to some countries where, I'll not mention the country because this is being recorded, but we've been to one country where there are 42 underage children in a brothel, and it's owned by a government official. I pray on a regular basis that God would break the arms of the oppressor and that we be able to bring people free. I pray that more people will be stirred into action and get off the seat of apathy and realize the power that they have to make a bigger difference on a regular basis. You know, we've got a team at Hope for Justice where we're not over 500 people at this moment in time, but I'm doing all I can in every possible way. And some of the stories are absolutely heartbreaking. I had a story that came across my desk last week of an 8-year-old girl in our Cambodian program. And the thing that she said that she was thankful for was that she got to sleep in a dry bed. And we reckon that she'd been on the streets. Her mum, hooked on cocaine, had probably sold her for a year and a half. And I've got a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old daughter. And I know what the ages they are. I know how precious it is to tuck them in at night. On a regular basis, whenever I'm tucking them in, I'm thinking about people like that.
Thank you. A more local question, which you might be able to answer. Somebody asked, are there any initiatives to help either with street prostitution or more generally with people trafficking in Liverpool that you know about?
Specifically in Liverpool, I know there are a number of organisations that are working in that community. I'd say, please give me an email and I'll be able to connect people into specifics. There are so many great organisations that are working tirelessly to try and help across the country. And I think, please, you know, I say this to people on a regular basis. I'm not precious about my phone number. I'm not precious about my email. I'll take a call from anybody who feels that they can do something about this. So if someone wants to drop me a message, I'll make sure I'll connect with our team. And then for a number of organisations that are working in Liverpool, we'll look to try and connect you in to the right people. And as I say, I know people have talked about what an organization in Leeds, and I would say wherever you are, there will be an organization that is trying to work in the communities, but it is challenging. It is difficult. I take my hat off to everybody who goes out night after night to try and build that bridge of trust, because the Stockholm syndrome, because of the issues, the complications, the trauma, there's a lot within this that we have to deal with. And when we started originally, we would go into churches and we'd talk about this issue, and people we'd get fired up and say, I've got to do something. And we'd have church pastors telling us that people in their church tried to go and break down the doors of brothels. I'd just say openly up front, we don't just want to interrupt traffickers' days. We actually want to see this shut down forever. So it needs to be thought through and run by good professional groups that don't put people in places of risk. So don't just, the feeling that you might have to want to do something has to be channeled properly. Like a laser, if it's channeled properly, light can cut through metal. We as Christians need to be laser focused on making a bigger difference.
Thank you. I think, Cal, you might have had a question.
Yes, if I could. Tim, thank you very much indeed. I come from a business background where we have been aware of the slavery issue for about 5 or 6 years. Mainly, it's the construction world. Mainly, the issue was, do we employ any slaves unknowingly, or are they in our immediate supply chain as subcontractors in the construction industry, which is not uncommon. But the question you were raising was about mining in places like Congo and India and China and Mozambique. And that's much harder for us. So we're in the electrical world, we buy an awful lot of copper, and I know perfectly well some of the copper mines are imperfect environmentally and imperfect in their social operations. And when I explored this further, I got very mixed responses as to what the best thing to do was. Some people said, no, go on buying, because that is the only way the slaves will earn any money at all. If they weren't working in these mines, things would be even worse. I've had that said to me by quite a number of serious people, which sounds absurd at first sight and isn't the normal thing you hear said. And others said, no, don't buy an electric car because of the cobalt. Don't buy a granite worktop because of the reasons you've said. I wonder what your view is on that.
Yeah, it's a really great point, and I think there are elements within this that are complications, and sometimes it's easy to make a statement, but to go into it in depth is difficult. But I'll try in a short period of time. Our view is always that we don't want people to shut down, because otherwise a phoenix just appears and they do exactly the same thing. So if you go after a particular company that is exploiting individuals, it doesn't change the status quo. Particularly for copper, there is actually an initiative called Green Copper that has come through of organizations that are working specifically to verify the mines in which copper is produced. We're going to need an awful lot of copper for electric vehicles to work. To give you a stat I got last week, for everyone to have electric vehicles in the UK, we would need to put copper in the ground more than is mined in a given year globally. So there's going to be a massive need of it. For us to move to electric vehicles, cobalt mining will need to go up by 30 times to enable everyone to have an electric vehicle. All of these things are not necessarily commonly known by people, but for major businesses, certainly within the construction industry, most businesses couldn't even tell me that in their first tier supply that people were being paid minimum wage, let alone verify whether people are in some form of modern slavery. Because people tend to use recruitment companies and they tend to bring people in for casual work, it becomes really complex. And that's why we want to have a thought through professional approach to it. So my first thing would be, I don't want people to stop. I want people to ask questions and to start demanding. So if you say to a company, we know this is happening, or we suspect this is happening, unless this changes, we're going to pull our supply in a year's time. That's where Slave Free Alliance can come in to try and help work, build a bridge of trust. It becomes more complex when it becomes state-sponsored. So there are currently 14 countries globally where we know of state-sponsored slavery that's happening. that makes it much more challenging to deal with, because when you can't get past the entrance to some facility because the government are doing it, it's at that moment in time that we actually believe that there needs to be a specific change that's brought. But that people like yourself, Gal, in positions of trust can start to ask questions. I'd love to talk with our Slave Free Alliance team and talk about areas and where this sits. We had one of those companies that came on board recently. I spoke at a church up in the Northwest and got connected to an employee from a company called Sunbelt Rentals, which is the largest plant hire company in the UK. And we've been working with them for the last 6 months to go through every aspect of their business and supply chain globally. They turn over 5.5 billion globally, but they're headquartered out of the UK. And it's people like that, when you start to ask questions and see changes come, that it transforms entire supply chains globally.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. I just wanted to add something that I learned from some of your earlier podcasts and LinkedIn posts a few months ago when I was researching for this conference, and you were speaking about influence, and I realised that actually, I'm on virtually every social media channel, and on there are thousands and thousands of influencers, journalists, PR people, and others, celebrities, who are paid to influence our purchasing decisions. So I basically just started asking the question of them. So, I follow a major beauty correspondent, journalist. So she's recommending products. So I started asking the questions about mica. I started asking her, do you know whether these retailers, whether their suppliers have slave-free supply chains? I asked a marble supplier, an interior designer that was talking about marble supplies. She actually went back to the provider of the marble and asked the questions, and they came back and said they would guarantee slave-free marble, which was amazing. So I think it's really easy to start asking the difficult questions, and it's, we can do that as consumers. So thank you so much. We're rapidly running into coffee break, but I think we would all like to put up our virtual claps to Tim and to Elaine for what they brought to us this morning. I just want to add, you talked about 915 children being back with their families in your child trafficking, particularly. So I just want to encourage you to come back online on the dates end of March and end of April to hear Caitlin and Mick talk about that work, to which Hope for Justice is also making a major contribution. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much again, both of our speakers. We're going to take 15 minutes now for tea or coffee and reconvene at 11:30, if that's okay. Tim, do you want to say anything in closing?
Yeah, I definitely would do. First of all, I will celebrate Mick Pease, who's on this call and coming on that going in the future. Mick was on the board of one of the organizations, Retrack, that merged into us, and actually was pivotal in trying to help us ensure that we weren't institutionalizing children going forward, that children belong in families. So I think that's going to be an excellent talk, and I'd encourage you all to get that in your diary. If you can share the dates later, that would be great. And then outside of that, I would just say that, people try and tell us that what we're talking about is impossible. The scale of the problem, the issue across the board. And we choose to greet the words of impossible with the words that Muhammad Ali spoke, that impossible is just a big word thrown around by small-minded men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than the power they have to change it. That impossible is nothing, impossible's temporary, impossible's a dare. So I dare you, whilst you go for your coffee break, to think about what you can do to make a bigger difference, to think about what Elaine has shared and I've shared, and think about the fact that you can do more on this issue. And I challenge you like I was challenged. Maybe, just maybe, if you don't do something, more people will be held against their will. And maybe if you do something, you can help to turn the tide on what's happening.
Bless you. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Elaine. With, I think, a change of emphasis, a change on the same subject, but a change of pace, a change of emphasis. something for us to really reflect on now as we listen to Mark Roques, who's director of Reality Bites, which is part of Thinking Faith Network. And I'm going to invite my dear friend, one of the co-founders and now one of the trustees of Thinking Faith Network, David Hanson, to introduce Mark to us. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Patricia. Yes, I'm David. I am a trustee of the old WYSOX and now of Thinking Faith Network, and getting very long in the tooth through all this. What a wonderful start we've had to this day from
Excellent. Elaine
and from Tim. Very challenging, quite filling up really, in the sense of one's oppressed by what one hears about the extent and the depth of this vile trade. Now, I want to introduce Mark Roques, whom we've known for many years. He came up to Leeds from Bristol to play a part with Anne in the running of WYSOX, and since in Thinking Faith Network. One of the things that most appeals to me about Mark's work is his ability to communicate the gospel of the kingdom of God in Jesus Christ in connection with topics of all kinds, interesting stories, remarkable people, strange events, things that catch attention, but in particular, things that hook into the experiences of the people he's talking to. So Mark's approach with the gospel into situations always attempts not to run Bible text past people's heads in one ear and out of the other, but to make them real by attaching them to the lives his hearers are living. And I'm quite sure that whatever he's going to talk to us about now, it will do the same. It will bring us into contact with Jesus Christ as the one who is the liberator from sin and death and slavery in our world. Mark, I'm waiting to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David. I just want to see if I can put my PowerPoint presentation up there. Has it gone up there? Yes. Can you all see that? I just need to go back.
Yes, thank you, Mark. You need to go to slide show view.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, well, thank you so much, Elaine and Tim and everyone who's been contributing. I'm really learning a lot this morning, so thank you so much. I want to just talk a bit about how we can talk about the issue of slavery, but connect it to the wider theme of materialism. And I do a conference in schools very much based around this, and I had some very good feedback from sixth formers about my message. And I want to just thank a good friend of ours. I know David and Ruth and Anne and Elaine know Arthur, who sadly, tragically died in January of this year. And I just want to thank him because some of the PowerPoint slides that I use, I've pinched from Dear Arthur. So I want to thank Arthur for many of the ideas in this presentation. When I go into schools, I like to tell the story about a human trafficker called Ludwik Tarzan Feinberg, who was a celebrity Ukrainian trafficker. And in the 1990s, he attempted to purchase a Russian submarine to help him smuggle cocaine. And this is a particular submarine that he was using. And he paid $5 million for it. But he got out of this industry and he began to enter the whole realm of human trafficking. And I've used this story on the streets of Leeds, and I find it always gets a good discussion. He said this: you can buy a woman for $10,000, make your money back in a week if she is pretty and young, then everything else is profit. And he also said, I go wherever and whenever the business takes me. You always follow the money to make the money. Obviously, he said this in his fluent Russian. And another comment, which relates to a lot of the work that Elaine has done so well. In Russia, he said, it's quite normal for men to slap women. It is cultural. It is part of life. So here we have this very, very shocking story of a trafficker. And I want just for a few moments at a very introductory level to talk about, I'm just letting someone come back in, the connection between human trafficking and philosophy. You see, I believe to understand Tarzan and the whole world in which he works and lives, we need to turn to for a moment to a famous 17th century philosopher who comes from Wiltshire, a great county in the south of England. And I believe that we need to help people to understand this philosophy of Thomas Hobbes. He was born in the year of the Armada. He was a very long-lived man. And his ideas have had a huge impact upon the Western world. And I think we need to name him and shame him. This is what he said in his famous book, Leviathan. The universe is corporeal, just a posh word for physical. All that is real is material, and what is not material is not real. He was one of the first people to really articulate this materialist philosophy. And he put it very pithily, life is but a motion of limbs. For what is the heart but a spring, and the nerves but so many strings, and the joint so many wheels giving motion to the whole body. And then in chapter 10, he brings it all together in a way that must be great news for a human trafficker. He puts it like this: the value or worth of a man or a woman is as of all other things his price. And I think it was Hobbes who was the first person to really make this connection. If everything is just physical, then human beings have very little value, except the value that the market puts upon them. I also believe that Thomas Hobbes was the first ever prosperity teacher, because he did in some way believe in God. And he's talking in his book about the kingdom of God. And he also, so he said in chapter 10, good fortune, if lasting, is honorable as a sign of the favor of God. Ill fortune and loss is dishonorable. Riches are honorable, for they are power, poverty, dishonorable. And if you can tell me the name of the couple there, I'll happily give you a check for £5. Because this idea of prosperity teaching comes directly from thinkers like Hobbes. Now, very simply, Hobbes was the first clever boffin to really articulate the materialist faith. And I've got there a picture of Hobbes, but also I've got a picture of a pork pie for you. See, Hobbes said that humans are just selfish, calculating machines. There's no right and wrong, just human feelings and opinions that have no factual basis. And for Hobbes, you are worth only what the market will pay for you. And we've been looking at this issue. Weak, vulnerable people are just commodities. You buy a pork pie, there's one for you to buy. You buy a woman or a young girl. And morality is just a human construct. Morality is just something we invent. And this materialist mindset is the perfect worldview for anybody working in the human trafficking industry. When I do this with teenagers who are very, very fascinated by this because they've never heard this view ever explained to them, the idea is that everything is just physical. Humans are selfish, calculating machines. As a bag of chemicals, you are worth between £5 if you're thin, or even less, and $7.99 if you're a little bit tubby like me and perhaps need to lose a few pounds. You're just a bag of chemicals. And girls, if you believe this, can be bought and sold, because a girl is just a bag of chemicals. And Tarzan, our dear friend there, is living in this story. Now, I want to just talk for a few moments before I get to some quotes and some stories about the issue of worldviews that we believe is very, very important to understand. Why don't we just talk about a person's faith or religion? Well, you see, today, faith and religion are not used of secular people. The word worldview includes everyone. And these worldviews are not intellectual ideas and philosophies. No, these are the worldviews. These are the big stories that can mug us and captivate our lives and imaginations. They mug us. They can take us prisoner. They can captivate our thinking and the way we live. And these stories are, like the iceberg, are often invisible and under the surface. They are deep, hidden spiritual commitments. As my friend Ron tried to find his golf ball, worldviews are often hidden, and you have to dig them out. You have to spend some time digging in the ground to understand what these worldviews are, and it can be hard work. See, the worldviews I'm talking about are what we live, not what we might claim. And Arthur and I love telling the story of Imelda Marcos, who was the wife of a Philippine dictator. And she and her husband stole about $5 billion from their country. And she once described poor people as eyesores, and she owned 3,000 pairs of shoes. And I've got here for you, I think 140 pairs of her shoes. And it must take quite a long time to try them all on. Famously, she was going to buy the Empire State Building in the 80s, which was going to cost her $750 million, but she thought that was far too ostentatious. So she bought the $51 million Crown Building and the $60 million Herald Center in New York. Now, here's the really important idea that we need to understand, is Imelda Marcos very much claimed and claims to be a Christian. She said, God is love. I have loved, therefore I will go to heaven. But what does she really believe? Well, I think she's a very committed consumerist. She's a follower of Thomas Hobbes. I shop, therefore I am. And this is Arthur's joke. If you're a fluent Latin speaker, which I'm hoping most of you are, Tesco ergo sum. Now, here we have Imelda Marcos, and ironically, she is holding a telephone shoe. I think she even understood the irony about her. And the idea is that science is going to make us all-knowing. And technology is going to give us tremendous power over the world. And this is going to lead to abundance, the flourishing of buying and selling goods and services. And this is going to lead to consumerism. I shop, therefore I am. And Arthur had a great way of explaining this, which I found very helpful and very useful for teenagers. Physical stuff is all there is. That's Hobbes. And this means that enjoying material possessions is all that matters. And this is a view that is extremely powerful in our culture today. It's a very, very powerful worldview, but it's also a faith. I find with teenagers, they like this image of we work, we buy, we consume, and we die. And this is the kind of Hobbes's view of the world, which is constantly bombarding Western people. What I want to do now is talk about how Hobbes impacts people today with some entertaining, I hope, and profoundly disturbing stories. And the first idea we get in Hobbes is let's commodify others. And we've already noticed this as a major theme in human trafficking. I've got here a cover of a book with a baby and a barcode. And it tells this idea that for some, the baby is just a commodity, a thing to buy and sell. And there are people who tragically buy and sell babies. And if this baby is just a machine following Hobbes, then why not buy it? We have no problem buying watches and computers. If materialism is true, then there's nothing wrong with buying living machines. Now, here's a mild version of how this is impacting people today. There's a story at the USA of a woman called Tracy Hogg, And she decided that her son is so cute, he should be used as a billboard. And for a certain fee, $100,000 if you want, a year-long contract, she will dress him in logoed clothes. And here is a picture of what she was wanting people to do. She thought her son was so cute and so wonderful that companies should pay her to put the logo on the little boy's T-shirt. And the idea is this is a great deal. But it's much more serious than this. The problems that both Elaine and Tim have been raising impact business and in particular football. Here we have a photo of Robbie Fowler. I won't do an impression of him, but he's a Scouser and he played for both England and Liverpool. And in his autobiography, he notices just how many clubs are into commodifying people. He said this, that's the problem with football. It's ruthless. And so are the people involved in it. You are a commodity and you can be treated in the most awful manner if they think it can help them in the slightest way. And, he's very insightful. Many clubs, this is their, as it were, de facto worldview. They treat the players as just commodities. Roy Keane, you might have heard of him. He used to play for Manchester United, often got into fights on the pitch. He's now a pundit working for ITV. And he wrote in an article, if I was to offer advice to Wayne Rooney, another famous footballer, who is a good lad, I would tell him to make sure he looks after number one. Players are pieces of meat. That is how I look at it. And clearly, I doubt if Roy Keane has read Thomas Hobbes, but he certainly got hold of that way of thinking, that worldview, that mindset. So here's an image that I use with teenagers. Hobbes, a leg of lamb that you buy, and a player understood as a piece of meat. And this is very much a materialist way of looking at the world. A few years ago, there was a terrible scandal about footballers playing for Leicester City. And it was a shocking video they took of themselves with 3 Thai prostitutes. And I spare your blushes by not talking about how they spoke about these 3 women. But it was horrendous, the racist language and the horrible way that they treated these poor girls as just objects to consume. And the question is, are they following Hobbes and his many followers? Russell Brand, I don't think he would say this now, but a few years ago, he really kind of nailed it. He said, I've got a fast-moving internal mechanism. There's a tyranny of choice, endless options. You buy loads of washing machines, cars, jeans. Why not consume people in the same way? So people in our culture are picking up this idea that we can consume people because they are just, at the end of the day, commodities to be used. And I think this boils down to this simple question of Harvey Weinstein, who we all have heard about. And I don't need to rehearse the terrible crimes, the horrific way in which he was treating so many vulnerable women. And the question is, does he have a faith? And most people today would say, no, he's just a secular man. But I think we've got to open up this idea and say, no, Harvey has a worldview. He's living in a story. He does have faith, and we need to understand his worldview, his faith. The other idea that we see from Hobbes is the idea of let's commodify ourselves. And some of these stories are tragic, but very important to understand. In his book, Bailey and Mavity argue that if we are living in a godless and soulless universe, then the only intelligent response is to sell yourself, go and make a pitch. And his book is entitled Life's a Pitch, How to Sell Yourself and Your Brilliant Ideas. And the idea is really, if we understand materialism, then this is the most rational thing to do. And a poll of Moscow high school girls had 60% stating that they would consider exchanging sex for hard currency. And again, we need to notice the impact of this materialist view. Famously, Anna Nicole Smith, in 1994, aged 26, married billionaire Howard Marshall, aged 89, in Houston, Texas. And the question we want to ask is, has she turned herself into a commodity? Now, if you are sensitive and you're quite easily moved, please get your hankies out now, because I'm going to show you a lovely photo of the couple. There's the happy couple. And I have been accused by some sixth formers of being cynical by showing this, but we now know that Anna Nicole Smith was just using this man, and she was hoping to get $100 million from his estate, but she didn't get a penny. Another one of a squash player called Danielle Drady, who wrapped her naked body in cling film and invited photographers to take pictures of her with a for sale sign hung around her neck. And I don't think she was being ironic. I think she has taken this message on. The story that I find sixth formers find most disturbing is the story of an American student who attempted to auction her virginity to pay for a master's degree in family and marriage therapy, which is quite ironic. And I've watched a video of a man of my age coming on and was willing to spend £1 million on taking her virginity. And it's truly shocking, but it shows the impact of this kind of worldview. Has she commodified herself? And the advert that they had for her, this Natalie Dillon, was very, very clear. She says she comes to us here at the Bunny Ranch with a very special gift. Natalie is a virgin and would like to sell this priceless and rare commodity in a very exclusive and private setting. And here we see how sex and virginity is turned into an economic transaction. Exactly the kind of thing that Elaine and Tim were talking about. I think the thing we need to notice is the other theme in our culture is let's commodify ourselves and then proclaim how unique we are. And I think this comes through perfectly in the story of Kim Kardashian, who is now a billionaire. She's worth $1.2 billion. And she's made a great deal of money. And she flaunts her beautiful body. And she was taking, at one stage, 1,500 selfies in one day. And there's a message here, which I think we need to ponder, which is paradoxical, because she's both worshipping and she's also selling herself. And there's that complexity of how she's proclaiming how unique she is and how wonderful and unique she is, liberalism, but she's also proclaiming, I'm here to sell myself and to make a great deal of money. And as you know, she's made huge amounts of money. Cheryl Cole, a very important story about Cheryl Cole. The cost of being Cheryl Cole, apparently she was spending about £1,000 a day on her lifestyle, but she was very stressed about her legs not looking perfect. And again, I think the image here is the idea of the body beautiful and how we are basically trying to look perfect, and we spend a lot of money and time on looking perfect. So I've got these two images here of Cheryl Cole and Kim Kardashian, and the message we're picking up is we spend money and time on looking perfect. We are committed materialists, proclaiming how unique we are. And I think we need to understand this kind of mindset if we are to reach people today with the gospel. I want to just talk for a few moments about the connection between materialism, slavery, and mental health. A few years ago, there was a story about a woman called Sarah Berg who has spent £500,000 on plastic surgery for herself. And she has promised her daughter that she can have plenty of operations when she's a bit older. And here is a photo of this woman, Sarah Berg, giving her daughter a voucher, a plastic surgery voucher, that when she is, 18, she will be allowed to have many, many operations to make herself beautiful. And so the question I'm asking is, what is this young girl's mental health? And I think there's a connection between the materialism and the mental health of this young girl. It came to the fore in 2014 with a young boy called Danny Bowman, who was taking about 200 photos a day, and he wanted to look perfect. You could say he was enslaved to this body perfect, body beautiful image worldview. And tragically, he was about to kill himself, and his mother found him and intervened, and he was saved. But again, it raises this issue of the connection between materialism and mental health. Tragically, in 2008, a 13-year-old girl from Leeds committed suicide because she thought she was fat and ugly. And again, I think there's an issue of slavery going on here that we need to notice. And the summary of what I'm trying to say with Sarah Berg and her daughter Poppy, with Danny Bowman, and the tragic story is there are many different kinds of slavery. There's spiritual forms of slavery. There's social forms of slavery and economic forms of slavery. And we need to understand how these different kinds of slavery, different aspects of slavery, impact ordinary young people. For a few moments, I want to talk about how we export beer and Hobbes to the third world. And this came through very strongly to me when I was doing research on the whole sex tourism in Thailand issue. And it's tragic. Some of the stories from Thailand are truly horrific. And the story I've used a lot in my teaching is the story of a little girl called Anne, who was sold to a brothel in Bangkok because her parents wanted to buy fridges and motorbikes. And the question we need to ask is, what's going on here where a culture that is traditionally Buddhist seems to have been taken over by this materialist way of thinking and living? And there was a Buddhist scholar who pointed this out. They've lost their way. He was speaking about how Buddhist monks have been impacted by materialism. Monks are supposed to renounce money. The teachings of the Buddha have been killed by the demonic religion of consumerism. And so again, we have somebody noticing the connection between the sex industry, the sex tourism, and the issue of materialism and consumerism. I just want to talk for a few moments about the issue of Hobbes in education, because I think we need to be honest about the fact that Hobbes still has a very big impact upon schools in the United Kingdom. For example, if you go into some schools, they teach lessons where you're taught to understand the world like Hobbes. So on the one hand, you have facts. Facts are an actual thing that exists and is provable, observable, and measurable. You look for the signal words, numbers, statistics, verified. You look at all those things, the idea of the hard sciences and maths, those things are facts. And you have to distinguish them from opinions that are merely a personal belief or judgment that is not founded on proof or certainty. And this is basically indoctrinating people into this materialist worldview. The only things that are really real are the things that we can count, the things that we can measure. And comments about the ethics of it or God, that's merely opinion. Now, I'm not denying that there are facts, but this framework is very unhelpful. Arthur Jones put together a brilliant way of understanding this view that says real knowledge comes only from maths, logic, and empirical science. Everything else is only opinion. And this is a view that is still present in our society when it comes to arithmetic, when it comes to logic, when it comes to science. We can have knowledge that's factual, that is well-grounded, but everything else is only opinion. And philosophy and religion are just opinion. And this leads to this framework that in the end, it is scientific reason versus blind faith. And this is the view of quite a lot of famous philosophers, not just Hobbes, but Hume, and there are other empiricist, materialist thinkers who take this view. So in conclusion, I'd like to just talk for a moment about how we can challenge Hobbes, because I think we need to be able to challenge this worldview. I did a lesson to about 100 young people about the story, a very inspiring story about Shea Cullen. And the students were absolutely fascinated by this lesson. And I've done it with hundreds of students now. But it tells the story of this missionary who went to the Philippines in the 60s, and he uncovered a child prostitution ring selling children to US soldiers. And he was deeply shocked by this. And he began to do what Tim and Elaine have been talking about, telling people, contacting the government, contacting government officials, telling people what was going wrong. And he inspired a 10-year campaign to remove US bases from the Philippines. And he did all the things that Tim and Elaine were talking about so impressively. And in 1992, because of the concerted efforts of many different people, the US Navy left the Philippines because of the bad noise, the smell of what was going on, and they had to leave. And this is because of the faithful work of countless people who were telling the truth about what was going on, how children were being commodified, used as items for sexual trade. Anyway, in my lesson to about 100 young people, I showed them a clip from an underground brothel with an Australian madam who was selling children to Shea Cullen, who had impersonated a paedophile man. And he went underground and he filmed what was going on. And I showed them this clip, 100 students with non-Christian teachers present, and they're absolutely fascinated by this. And one boy was crying when he saw this. But I didn't leave it there. I basically explained to these 100 young people this issue which we've been looking at. Are trafficked children just items for sale? Are they things? Are they just commodities? And I outlined the materialist view. Or are they precious creatures made in God's image? And it was so encouraging at the end of the lesson. Loads of young people came up to me and wanted to ask me about the Christian faith, because they'd suddenly realized how important it is that we don't just see people as things to trade and buy. And I was also encouraged when non-Christian teachers came up to me and had some great questions that they wanted to ask me about the Christian faith. I really felt I'd got through by raising this story. I've written the feedback. I've written an article for RE today about this story and about how I used it in a school. And the feedback from the students and teachers was really very, very encouraging. And I learned there that nowadays you just can't go into a school and tell them about the Christian faith. You have to contrast it with something going on in our culture. And if you do this contrast work, you get a far better, a far stronger response to the Christian faith. I've also done this on the streets of Leeds, where myself and Mark Eden and other people, we go out on the streets of Leeds and we talk to students about this issue of materialism. And on one occasion, I was speaking to a young woman about this issue, and she said, "This is absolutely fascinating what you're saying. So I've got to go to the pub now with my friends." And I thought, it's over. And then 5 minutes later, she came back and she said to me, "That was such a fascinating conversation. Can we carry on? Can you tell me more about how you look at this issue of materialism?" And I was able to talk to her about Jesus in a cheese-free way, and it was incredibly encouraging. The other thing I do is I try to get people to think about the story of Tarzan by asking 4 very simple questions about Tarzan. Should he follow his heart And most people wouldn't really go along with that. Should he follow Hobbes and commodify young girls? And most people don't really want to go with that view. Or should he follow his horoscope, which might tell him to buy more girls at a lower price? Or should he follow Jesus? And I've been able to really share the gospel with all kinds of students by using the story of Tarzan. Now, Patricia and I have written a course, I'm almost finished, which helps people to use these kinds of stories in discipling others. And our belief is that we need to understand materialism, and we need to have lots of stories that illustrate how materialism disciples people, how it shapes the way people live. And we've done this course, and we'd really love you to have a look at it. There's the information, Slave Chronicles and Dangerous Beliefs, Discipling Others Through Creative Storytelling, and there you've got the information. And we really believe, Patricia and I, that this is something that can help us not only to understand human trafficking in all its horror and all its tragedy, but to understand the worldview, the mindset, the faith that sponsors human trafficking. And it's got nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus Christ. We've got 20 other stories, 21 stories in the course, and please do think about buying it for your church or going through it, because it will teach you how to share your faith in a non-cheesy way. Anyway, I've come to the end of my presentation. What I've got there is what I do for sixth formers. I've written down some of the issues, which you can have a look at. If you have any questions, Patricia, do we have time for questions?
We do, Mark. Can you close your presentation?
Yes. How's that? Is that closed?
No, it's still on screen.
Okay. How do I get out of this? Sorry.
Just go to the cross in the corner.
Cross in the corner. Cross in the corner.
Right-hand corner.
Screen.
Sorry, where's I can't see this. Sorry, I'm very.
Mark, you need to stop sharing screen.
Okay, right, sharing screen. Sorry.
Just stop that.
I'm just trying to find it. I can't seem to bring up the
green strip at the top.
Oh, right. Sorry, I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you so much, Mark. I always love listening to your stories because they're so pertinent and relevant, but so accessible as well. So thank you very much for that romp through Hobbes and materialism and Christian belief. I've got two questions for you. The first one is you showed an image of a book, Selling Yourself. What's the difference between commodifying yourself, as you called it, and putting your best foot forward in the workplace?
Very good question. Well, I think there is a very, very big difference between seeing yourself as just an object, a thing to be used by other people, and seeing yourself as seeing yourself as a person with dignity, with integrity, as basically putting your best foot forward. There is a sense in which we all want to present ourselves in the best possible way. I try to do that all the time with people. There's nothing unethical or wrong about that, right? It basically comes back to your implicit view of a person. Do you believe that you are made in God's image? Do you have dignity? And do you present yourself in that light, in that kind of view as being implicit? But I think there are some people, I think the story of Natalie Dillon, who's auctioning her virginity, who's not doing that. She's basically turning herself into a sex object. Now, there's no kind of clear algorithm by which you can discern how people do this, but I think there is a way of discerning what I call the worldview behind the way people present themselves. when I watched that show on the Tyler Brooks show where Natalie Dillon was trying to sell herself, it came through very much. He said, I'm doing what the market tells me to do. And it came through very, very strongly. But what was interesting about that story is that she didn't go through with it. She was going to receive $2 million from an American businessman. And she found the whole thing, she discussed it on the talk show and discussed it with him. She decided that she didn't want to go through with it. And I think that's because people start to realize what they are doing is degrading. It's degrading to themselves. So I think the answer is we have to have wisdom. To put it simply, we have to have wisdom by which we discern where people are coming from. And that wisdom is something we get from really knowing scripture, knowing the biblical narrative, loving the biblical narrative, and rejecting the blandishments of someone like Thomas Hobbes.
Thank you. Right, a real biggie to finish with before we move on to our final speaker. And I don't know if you can tackle this in a minute or so, but is there an alternative to capitalism and its underpinning materialism?
Well, that is a huge issue, and I really can't say very much here. But very quickly, I do think there's something that is impoverished about capitalism in the sense of reducing everything to capital. I think there's something good about having a certain freedom. But I would point to the story of George Cadbury, who had a factory which was run on a profoundly different worldview from many of the factories that I have experienced. I've worked in factories, and they seem to be run on the lines of profit is the most important thing. I think a business does not have to have that view that profit is everything. I think it can be profit sensitive without being profit driven. And I think the story of George Cadbury, his wonderful chocolate factory, is a wonderful example of a business that is not capitalist, but is genuinely loving and concerned for people, but also making very, very good products. I think it's possible to make good products without it being capitalist. So the long and the short of it is I personally would not refer to myself as a capitalist, but at the same time, I wouldn't call myself a socialist, because I think both of those movements come from the Enlightenment. But I haven't got time to go into talking about what the Enlightenment did. But I would recommend a book by somebody called Bob Goutsfart called Capitalism and Progress, where he does really look in depth at some of these issues about the faith, the worldview behind capitalism and the worldview behind socialism. It's an excellent book. I don't know if it's any longer in print, but I would recommend you to have a read of that book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for a really interesting and insightful talk. And just to underscore, if you're interested in the course that Mark and I have been working on, please do go to the Thinking Faith Network website and have a look at that course about the Slavery Chronicles. It will really help you to be on with some stories that you too can use. So I'm going to move on to our final speaker of the morning. Last but not least at all is Anne Burghgraef. Based here in Yorkshire, Anne is clinical director of the charity Solace Surviving Exile and Persecution, which is a specialist therapeutic service really for refugees and asylum seekers. And as part of her work, Anne often serves people who have suffered torture or been victims of slavery, or both, sadly. Anne's interests in what enables human flourishing have taken her into all sorts of studies in theology and philosophy, feminism, psychology and psychotherapy. She's a woman of many talents, great compassion and great counselling skills too. So in addition to writing courses and training her own team and lots of other people now throughout West Yorkshire and across different regions, and is often called upon these days to talk. So today she's going to help us understand the supportive and healing role that we can have as individuals and churches, and in coming alongside those who have experienced any form of slavery. And as Elaine has shown us and Tim has shown us too, slavery can be a very subtle as well as a complex issue. So I'm going to hand it over to Anne. Welcome, Anne, and it's really nice to have you.
Make her the host.
I have. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. Well, yes. Thank you, Patricia, for that lovely welcome, and to all the other speakers who have really painted a picture of what's happening globally, what's motivating it, and so many of the factors involved. We're going to now turn to how does this impact the people who have been enslaved, and what helps to restore people's lives in their fullness. And I'm so pleased today that a brave survivor of trafficking is joining us, Feluca. Feluca's there with Cal and Joe Bailey, and so thank you, Feluca. You're so welcome. Do you want to just say a brief hello?
Okay. Hi, my name is Feluca, and my voice is all of a sudden gone. But yeah. Hi.
Oh, great, thank you. So at various points, Feluca is going to share something of her story, something of what led her into trafficking, how that's impacted her, and what's helped her to not just survive but thrive. So, so pleased that you're with us today, because that will really help to bring this alive. I'm just going to share my screen now. Given that this is a Thinking Faith network, I thought, we always have to name some philosopher. And although I'm not a particular fan of Rousseau, we could go into that. But he's made this comment where he said, slaves lose everything in their chains, even the desire of escaping from them. And well, that is a quote that we could challenge, because there is a desire, but it does show that the experience of being enslaved by other human beings has a profound impact, and that's something that we'll explore a bit further. Okay, so when I've got this little bar at the top here. Never mind. When we want to think about how do we help people who have been affected by modern slavery and trafficking, we need to think about what was their life like prior to enslavement, and what kind of treatment did they have? Were they forced into sex work? Were they working in fields? What was going on? How long were they enslaved? Was it for a few weeks, months, or years? What treatment, what tactics were used to keep them in slavery? And then what was available when they emerged from it? Tim talked a lot about rescuing people. And once people are coming out of it, there's a whole other journey ahead. Okay. I won't talk about the definition. As I indicated earlier on, the experiences of trafficking can be vast. The context in which I work in is with people who have been enslaved from in other countries. They've been trafficked to the UK, or they've been trafficked elsewhere, but they come to the UK and they then need to seek asylum, and that's the context. So I'm only working with a fraction of people. I'm aware that there are many people trafficked throughout the UK, but they're not the ones that I tend to come in contact with. Okay. As Elaine has indicated earlier, there are certain factors socially that predispose people and make them vulnerable to trafficking, and that's something we need to think about. So people who are young and who are vulnerable because they lack any sense of future, no opportunities to work or get an education, or where there's police corruption, where you cannot rely on the police to protect you. And countries, as has been indicated, where in Southeast Asia, they promote sex tourism, or where there's a demand for cheap and unprotected labor. And so this creates a context to developing these trafficking routes. And some of the top countries from which people are trafficked into the UK are Nigeria. Some years ago, it was #1. It's now been overtaken. Albania, and Vietnam, we see increasing people coming from Albania. Okay. And so when you open up, you realize that, many people who have been vulnerable to trafficking lack the support. In America, so 90% of sex trafficked minors were runaway. And as Elaine indicated, there's a fine line between entering into prostitution and being actually trafficked across borders. And in the States, you can be trafficked across state borders, and which has huge implications because they have a private system of healthcare. So in one country, you may have access to healthcare. You cross the border, you don't. Those who have had a history of abuse may not really realize at first that they're being trafficked because they've been used to being beaten and abused throughout their life. Okay, so again, more vulnerable. Anyone who has any kind of vulnerability, and in our case, people who are refugees, who are seeking asylum, and people who don't speak the language. Okay, and as indicated by Elaine and Tim, people are not just snatched up off the street. There's a very careful and organized way of approaching people. So the tactics are tailored. So what it does is they're looking at how do they tap into certain thought patterns, ways of being, and exploit that for their own ends. So they may pose as a family friend, or romantic partner, or somebody who's going to give you a new life, education, and they will use certain kinds of psychological manipulation, building up the trust, offering you promises of a grand future. And once they begin to get engaged in that process, they become economically dependent, they can be threatened. And one of the things that is very powerful for people is the threat of harm to your family. So I worked with a woman many years ago from Nigeria. She'd been trafficked from Nigeria, forced into sex work in another European country. And she then escaped and went to another part of the UK and to claim asylum. She was forced to return back to her country. And when she came there, she found out that her traffickers punished her family by killing them and burning down the family home because she'd managed to escape. So the threat of harm to your loved ones is very powerful. You may be kept drugged up to keep you compliant. All kinds of things, reporting you to the authorities, as we've indicated earlier, many strategies of coercion. So, and as Elaine indicated, people get targeted, trust is developed through all kinds of ways, filling a need that's vulnerable, and then gaining more control over someone's life and isolating them from other people that might give them support, and then making demands for some kind of payment and having these strategies to maintain some form of control over their world. And so I went through this bit fairly quickly because part of it was reiterating some of the things were said earlier. So in thinking about what makes you vulnerable to being trafficked, Feluca has kindly agreed to share part of her story as a journey, the journey of her being a survivor. And so Feluca, could I just invite you to talk about that part of your journey?
Yes, I guess the whole process kind of started when my father died, and because my mother wasn't frequent in my life, she's always coming and going, and when he was taken off sick, a man came to the house claiming to be my uncle, or claiming to be my father's brother, and saying that I have to stay with him to my father get better. By this time I was like 10 years old, and I stayed with him for a while, and then I was told my father died while I was with them, and then like my mom is gonna come and pick me up at some point, and then weeks becomes months becomes years, and when I ask when is my mother coming, it was from she's coming to don't ask again, and when I do ask, is it I get locked in a cupboard or get bitten. And then I learned quite quickly that the more I ask, the more I get punished. So I stop asking and then just keep living in that kind of environment. So in Nigeria, we have a culture where every rich person has something called an house girl, someone that helps you do domestic work. And I was this for this particular family from when I was 10 to when I was 15. And then I remember a particular day where they told me we're traveling. But I think a week before that, they took me to a market. I remember this vividly because that has never happened before, like ever. Did they ever buy me anything? Usually give you hands down things to wear. Or when they're eating, I'm not allowed to eat on the same table. I only eat whatever is left over from their food. And I'm not allowed to sit in the same table because I'm not seen as equal to them. And even to today, I still have that complex where I feel like everybody else is better than me. And it will take time for that to go away, but that's still there. And I was told, oh, we're traveling. And in my mind, I thought we're going to another state in Nigeria. But that wasn't the case, because we end up on the plane. And then before I know it, I was in the UK. And then when I was in the UK, I guess it was the first time ever I've seen anyone that of different race to me. And I was fascinated by everybody, and men having hair. I'm like, oh, this is different. For me, I was captivated by seeing everybody, and then the elevator, which I call the magic stairs, because I was coming from a place where I didn't have that much education anyway, to a completely different world that I didn't know about. And then from the first day, I wasn't allowed to go outside, talk to strangers. If the postman comes to drop a post, and if I have to sign for it, I'm not allowed to sign for it. So the day that they put the post through the door, then I think when I got there, there was a lady that was there before. I think she was from Jamaica, and they told me she's an au pair, that she will be in the house for about a month, and after that she'll be gone, and I have to shadow her and do absolutely everything she does and more when she left. And then when she left, it was more of I have to take on that responsibility. I wake up at 5, and I'm not allowed to go to bed until about 10 p.m. So it kind of like ranges from, at first they had 2 kids, and then they had a third one, and then I think they had another family member that brought 2 more kids over. So I was responsible for looking after 5 kids. So giving them food, bathing them, taking them to school, picking them from school, dropping them at tennis clubs or piano lessons or swimming lessons. I have to do most of all of these things. And through all of these, I didn't have education myself. And I tend to learn through the kids' homework. When they bring in their homework from school, I'll try to see if I can learn as much as I can while we go along. And there was a particular incident where I had a stomach pain, which was later diagnosed as H. pylori. And anytime that happens, I have a crippling pain where I literally can't do anything. And it was at this point when they registered me to the GP. And even if I have to go to the GP, they are present. And I think it's something to do with GP and patient confidentiality. So they have to stay in the waiting room, and I have to go in. And when I did come back, I need to give them the precise everything I said, what the GP said, and I have to give them everything that was being said. And this went on over time. If I do something wrong, or I didn't clean the house properly, I get bitten, or I'm not allowed to eat any food. And in most cases, I give the kids more cereal than they need, so that while I'm throwing the food away, I will eat it. But I'm doing it on purpose so that I could get to eat more than I was allowed to eat. And it's like I'll see people. At first, I thought it was the norm, and being beaten, growing up where I grew up, being beaten is like normal. That happens all the time. So to me, it was the way of life, and I've been with them for quite a while. That I thought, oh, maybe that's how things are for people my age. And as I got older, and I saw kids my age going to school, and I yearned to be like them, to like want to go to school the way they go to school. But I wasn't really allowed to do any of those. And it got to a point where I wanted to leave, but there was no way for me to leave, because I'm thinking, where am I going to go? I don't know anybody. These are the only people I know. And there was a particular incident where I think it was during the winter, and I went to go and drop the kids at school, and I think I only had slippers, which is what I wore to school. And one of the teachers, I think she noticed that I wasn't wearing appropriate clothing for the weather, and I'm not sure what happened. All I know is that the lady came back from work and she was livid. She beat me with belt, locked me up in a room, and told me I was disgraceful, I embarrassed her outside, that I shouldn't dress the way I dressed. And I'm thinking, what else am I supposed to wear? I wear whatever you gave me. And I think I remember her buying me a trainers and giving me more other clothes that are quite warmer, so that when I do take the kids to school, people won't notice it as much. And I've noticed people from Nigeria are quite religious. I would tend to go to like Nigerian churches that take like 4 hours or sometimes longer than that. And even in the churches, there are quite people like me that were doing the same thing, because they will have family friends that have someone that lives with them that they brought from Nigeria that is looking after their kids, looking after their home. So in the church, it was predominantly Nigerians that go to that church, and each person have someone similar to me that is doing that. So in that community, it was seen as a norm. It was seen as a status in a way, where if you have a house girl or someone that's in your house that is doing all the stuff for you for free, it's a sign of being wealthy. And it was normalized in my community that way, for you to live in that kind of scenario. So I think it got to a point where I wanted to get out. There was no way out, and it was more of the best thing to do was just to kill myself or just end it. And I remember I had a prescription to pick up from the GP that day, so I timed it so that it's about 30 minutes before I pick up the kids. So in case the lady called, because sometimes she work from home or sometimes she work at the office, so that when she does ask me that why aren't you at home at this particular point in time, I can tell her that, oh, I just went to DP to pick up something, and I went to pick up the kids along the way. Or it could be, I could say there was traffic or something along those lines, but it's like it's something that could easily disguise without being caught out. And I remember just completely breaking down in front of the GP, and I think she asked what the situation was at home, and I completely clammed up, and I wouldn't tell her anything. And she noticed something was wrong at home, but if I don't tell her what's going on, I don't think she could really help much. So what she gave me antidepressant. I think that's where my antidepressant kind of started from. And she gave me a number for the Samaritan, that when things get really bad, if I can get the chance to call the Samaritan, call somebody and speak to them about it. And then there was an incident where I was really beaten badly, and I felt like, that's it, I've had enough, I'm done. And then I called the Samaritan, and the lady I spoke to on the phone was like, okay, this has escalated, and I think I have to call the police because I'm obligated to do so. And I was like, I don't want her to do that. And she was like, okay, are you going to do it or am I going to do it? Either way, I need to inform them of what's going on. And then I called the police. The lady was like, talk clearly, I can't hear you. And I was whispering, I'm telling her I can't speak louder because people will know I'm calling you and I'm not supposed to do that. And I think at that point the lady knew that I was in a bad situation. And she said, okay, can you get out of the house? It was more of, I can't, not willingly. They have to actually let me go physically. And it's like, can you make up any excuse? I don't care what it is, just make something up. And I still have the prescription from the GP for my H. pylori. I'm like, I can use this and tell them I need to pick it up. Maybe. And if that doesn't work, then there's nothing I can do. So we had two plans. One, go downstairs, tell them you need to pick up the prescription. If that doesn't work, or the next day, a police will come around when they've gone to work. And then you can have a chat with them at that time. So I'm like, okay, fine. I'll implement plan A to see if that works. If it doesn't work, I'll wait till the next day. So when I got downstairs, showed them and luckily plan A worked. So I went outside, found the police officer, I think about 3 streets away, because I didn't want them to be too obvious for the people in the house to notice. And then by the time I explained what was going on and how things were, and I was really distressed because I couldn't stop crying for the damn time. And the man said that you can't go back in there. I'm like, what do you mean I can't go back? Of course I can go back in there. That we first and foremost, going back in there is not safe for you. And second, we need to go and arrest them. And I just completely lost it. I'm like, you can't do that. then everything's going to get worse. I'm like, first, because I told him that I've always been bitten from when I was young, and at this point I was about 24, and it was like, no one has the right to lay their hands on you. I'm like, obviously you don't know what my culture is and where I'm coming from. And guess what? I don't care what that is, but in this country you're not allowed to do that. So to cut the long story short, they were arrested, I was rescued, and the Salvation Army was one of the charities that did help me, because they moved them from London to Leeds because they wanted to create a huge gap and a huge space between my trafficker and myself. And that was how I ended up. Yeah.
Thank you, Feluca. That's quite a journey, and I know how hard it is to be able to go through those stories again. And so thank you, because that's far more powerful than anything I could say. So just take a break for a moment, and then we'll come back to how all this has affected you and what's helped you, okay?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Thank you. We've heard, from Feluca, the tactics that have been used to keep her enslaved, and so much of it is about taking away your means of communication, controlling your environment, in all kinds of ways. In Feluca's case, she was quite carefully tracked. She had to do particular jobs. Women who are trafficked and in the sex work and are locked up in houses are also kept isolated. So they may be locked in their rooms. And that is, I think, one of the big differences is that you're so cut off from everyone and you're just left alone. And Feluca indicated something about how do you survive? What helps you to survive? And what we know, and it's a bit like people who are taken hostages, if you fight it all the way, you're going to end up dead. Like, realize, like, if I just keep up this, I'm going to be beaten to death. And if you just kind of give up and acquiesce, you don't survive very well either. But those who survive are able to somehow keep their brains online and find the ways in which they can navigate. Where is there a little bit of freedom? And so you really have to keep your brain online. And if you're so stressed and overwhelmed, then you may just lose that. For many women in the sex trade, they're kept drugged up so that they're compliant, and they lose consciousness about what day it is, what time it is. But I know some will just consciously not take the drugs so that they can kind of stay alert to what is actually going on. And the idea that the traffickers are in league with the police is very powerful. And they may be in other parts of the world. And sadly, I've known people who have made it out to the police station only to be turned away. That's quite distressing, because it's actually happening here. And as Feluca indicated, there are very subtle messages going on, which is that you're worthless. Nobody cares about you but us. You're damaged goods. No one will believe you. And all that has a profound effect at eroding any sense of dignity or worth or, a sense of agency. And that is one of the most profound things, is that it can really damage your sense of agency. Okay. One of the things Tim referred to as Stockhausen syndrome, another word is called trauma bonding. And this is this situation where in some contexts, people who are enslaved form an unhealthy attachment. They form a relationship of dependency, a relationship of almost being fused to their trafficker. And so what you get is a very complex situation of, being treated well, when you're lured into it, you may be treated like a princess, promised all kinds of things. And then you get the threats or the subtle implications of threat. And I think this is a really interesting quote. It's that this syndrome has been explained as the product of interpersonal trauma, during which the perpetrator provokes the fear in the trafficked person. And then when they stop that, it elicits all kinds of feelings of gratitude for being allowed to survive, for any, perceived kindness or affection. And so it's a highly manipulative and destructive kind of process of enslavement. And there's all kinds of hidden messages as well about not speaking, about not revealing to anybody, otherwise dangerous things will happen. And in some countries, like Nigeria, there is this kind of form of juju, which is that if you tell anybody, you will be cursed or you'll die instantly. I know a young woman from Guinea who didn't tell anybody for a long time that she'd been a survivor of FGM, because she was told that if she tells anybody, she will die. So as we were talking about earlier on, there's many circumstances that kind of protect or promote and make people vulnerable. So I want to introduce you to a young woman called Alba, 22, who is from the north of Albania. And in this part of the world, there is a tradition called the kanun, where there are these rules for how you treat people, how you should behave, about kin loyalty, touches on things like blood feuding, etc. And so in that part of the world, it's very patriarchal. Fathers have the power. I believe when men get married, they're given a silver bullet to kill their wife if she's not obeying or doing whatever you want her to do. And so for Alba, she grew up in this context with her father being quite violent, who had mental health difficulties, and he would abuse his wife and his children. And the mother offered no protection. And this isn't the first woman. I've known many where it's like, this is the way of life here. You just have to put up with it. And to Alba, the mother said, it would have been better if you were a boy. And that has stayed with her, a sense of there's something not right about me. Because if I was a boy, I would be, privileged. I'd have an education and employment and respect and attention. And so she was a bright young woman, but she was forced to leave school as a young teenager and, do domestic work at home. And she met a young man. And this young man gave her attention. He gave her a mobile phone and made her feel very special. He made promises, and she thought that he loved her, but he was slowly easing her away. Anyway, she thought, he loves me, and I'm going to introduce him to my family because they will be happy, that I found someone. And instead of protecting her, her parents rejected her. She had brought dishonor to the family by having a secret relationship with this man. So consequently, rejected by her family, shamed by her community, she didn't have much choice. So she left with this young man and traveled across country to Belgium. And when she got there, she realized that she was there to work in the sex industry. And this trafficker, who had been so kind and loving, became a cruel tyrant. He demanded money for, the support he gave her to cross country. And so she got entrapped. And it wasn't till they moved to the UK, and she overheard her traffickers talking about her one night, saying how naive and stupid she was, and that they were talking about how much money they could get for her. So she realized that she was in danger. She also knew they had guns and, they could kill her. So she did wait for an opportune moment, and she ran away. She managed to get to the police station. And what the police did was, she didn't know anything about seeking asylum. But they put her into the Yarlswood Detention Center, which is near Kettering. And this was very traumatic for her because she was behind bars. She was locked in. It's effectively a prison. So although she was no longer in the grip of the traffickers, she entered into this other system. And while she was there, she discovered that she was pregnant. And it was only through the help of medical justice that she was released and that she was enabled to properly engage in the asylum process. At that time, there was a system of being fast-tracked into detention for immigration removal. Thankfully, that's been curbed, but it's still a very kind of traumatic situation. And so she was left, with a lot of feelings of guilt or self-blame. How could she be so stupid for being, drawn into it? Thankfully, she, was in Leeds. Leeds is fortunate to have many great organizations that support asylum seekers and refugees. She was able to access therapy, and she entered into a system called the National Referral Mechanism, which is the system that identifies victims of trafficking. You're supposed to get 40 days of time for reflection, and then you put your case together. With this National Referral Mechanism, no one's really talked about it. It's a one-shot deal. If there's no right of appeal, a decision is made to see whether you're accepted as a victim of trafficking or not, but that can just draw out and prolong the whole process. And there's a separate process for seeking asylum. Just because you get a positive NRM doesn't mean that you'll be granted asylum. It's quite a complex situation. But anyways, this young woman ended up getting her status, having a lovely little girl, and she and a lot of her fellow Albanians really support one another. My colleague at Solace, Reza, he's an Iranian man. During lockdown, he ran a group for young Albanian women. Many of them have young children. They work really hard to be good parents and support one another. Okay. So just getting on to a bit more of the consequences. Feluca talked about being beaten. If you are beaten, if you are tortured in situations of great fear, what we would call traumatic events, your body will remember that pain. So many victims of trafficking have pain globally throughout their body and in very specific areas. There may be, signs of drug use, sexually transmitted diseases. So if anyone comes out of sex trafficking, they should, be taken in for a medical examination, untreated fractures. And we don't have time to talk about, stress, but most people will think about post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma. And the consequences of that are very deeply embodied and are very long-lasting and things that need to be addressed. So lots of complex mental health issues. And, I think it's quite interesting that 98% in this 2014 study of sex trafficked people had at least one or more psychological disorder. Anyways, before we go into that a bit further, Feluca, are you ready to talk about how your experience of trafficking has impacted you?
Yes. So at the moment, I have something called dissociative fugue. And what that happens is I can lose a long period of time where I can't tell you what happened during that time. And I guess that the scary part is, to me, it doesn't feel like time has passed at all. Sometimes I can skip a whole day. So it'll be Friday and then it's Sunday. I'm like, what happened to Saturday? I don't have memory of what happened within that time. And I'm in therapy even to today. I think I've been in therapy for more than 7 years. And sometimes it's ongoing, sometimes it goes down, sometimes it goes up. I've been sectioned about 2 or 3 times when I was deemed a danger to myself. And the most prominent part of my disassociation is a few things can trigger it. A sense of smell that takes me back to being in servitude, and I'm just like that. 1 minute I'm talking to you, and then the next minute I am gone. and it's just more of I don't recollect what happens. It's like a part of me takes over that. And I think it kind of like begins when I was still in servitude, where I guess every Monday is a spring cleaning day, where everything has to be changed, everything has to be deep cleaned, and this is including still looking after the kids, still cleaning and ironing and doing all the stuff. And I dreaded Mondays with passion. Even to today, I still don't like Mondays. And I find like I wake up dreading the day, and then the day is over, and I've done absolutely everything that I needed to be done. But I can't tell you who did them, because I don't have memory of it. All I know is one minute I'm dreading it, next minute it's all done. I think over time, anytime I'm stressed or overwhelmed, my body just goes into that mode where I'm completely removed from the process, and everything just maybe continues as normal. And then even after I was taken out of servitude, anything can trigger it. Like I said, a sense of smell or a sense of deja vu. I thought it was because the family drove a Mercedes Benz. Anytime I see a Mercedes Benz, I go into a panic attack, because I'm thinking they found me, they're going to take me back. And that just continue over and over and over again. And then even when sometimes I can end up in in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m. in the morning, and I have no idea how I got there. All I know was like either I was stressed or I was overwhelmed, and then I am in different places. The one that was the most really difficult was when it happens middle of the night, and I think my GP was aware of my state of mind prior to that, and it took an helicopter to rescue me from. I was in the middle of nowhere. All I was surrounded by was just trees after trees, and then tracking me becomes really impossible. But because I had my phone on me, so they could track me through my GPS, and they were able to find me eventually. But it took a lot of team of people to looking and searching to be able to find me. And sometimes it can happen twice a week, sometimes once a week. Anything can trigger it. And when I'm overwhelmed, even now, I can just switch just like that. Or I can be nervous. And sometimes I still have panic attacks. Sometimes I don't know what causes them or why I'm panicking. All I know is like I'm panicking, and I have to find ways of being able to cope and maintain that state. And through the help of my mental health nurse, my psychotherapy, and the support network that I have around me, and my GP, I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for them. So many people, sorry, have to help
Take
me.
a breath, Feluca.
So many people have helped me along the way, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. And this includes my GP, even my tennis club. Like, they might not know that they give me a place to escape to.
Yeah. Okay. Feluca, just take a breath and relax, and we'll come back. We'll come back in a few minutes. Okay. Just have a drink and relax. And thank you. I know how incredibly difficult this is, and one of the things that you probably will have experienced along with many others is that you sought asylum after you came to Leeds. You were in the asylum system, you told me, for 5 years.
5 years.
And the 5 years is one of living in limbo, of never feeling safe or secure, which is what you need in order to recover.
I've been moved from one place to another.
Yeah.
And it's like, just when I think I found a friend or established something, I was told I'm being moved to somewhere else again. There was a point where they're going to move me to, just when I've just established a connection. And when I first came, I had no one, and they were going to move me. And at the time, I was volunteering for the Refugee Council, and Rose McCarthy was saying, well, they can't move you if they can't find you. And I think there was I think we're going to Mallamdale. There was a trip that was planned to go to Mallamdale, and I went with them for the weekend to the Malmdale. So when the Home Office people came to pick me up, I wasn't there because I was in Malmdale, and I took a letter from my GP and my therapy to say they can't move me because it's going to impact me mentally. I'm just going to go down the drain, and that really helped, being able to stay where I'm just establishing myself, if that makes sense.
Yes. Thank you, Feluca. I know how important that is, and the role of other agencies writing letters to say, you shouldn't be moved. We at Solace, we do that often to support people's mental health, because it takes a long time to build up that network of support, which has been so crucial, as you pointed out, in helping you to manage through that really difficult time. And one of the things I was going to say was about the Home Office and being forced to retell your story in very non-therapeutic circumstances just serves to etch the trauma in much more deeply. That's my experience. I don't know if that's something that you experienced, having to go through that with the Home Office.
I feel like the Home Office traumatized me on its own. And I think it kind of started from the beginning, where it was like, we don't believe you. And I was thinking, God, I wish it was a lie. I wish everything I've been through was a lie, because then it means I don't have to relieve all the stress. And then having to retell the same story over and over again, but they were asking in different ways. I don't know why they're asking me the same thing, but in a different format or in a different way. Are they trying to catch me out? Like, I don't really understand what game they're playing with me. And they were asking me different things, and then pick out bits and pieces that probably fits whatever they wanted to go with. They say, oh, you said that first time, now you said this, they do not correlate. I'm like, well, you're taking it out of context, because if you look at the context in which it was said, it is still the same thing but said differently. And then that process just went on over and over again. The first time I was rejected, I had to go to court, and then the judge was the same thing, I had to go to court again. Like, in the end, I was given the permission to stay, but if it wasn't for my GP and my therapy, I don't think that would have been the case.
No. Thank you, Feluca. No, that's one of the things I try to communicate when I'm working with people in the NHS, how important it is to offer the support, to write the letters, and this issue of decision making is absolutely crucial. And for anyone who's interested, I've written a paper about the decision-making process and how we can help. It's called Truth, Trauma and Testimony, and it's available in the Solace Monograph series on our website, because of the nature, we don't have time to get into the way that the way that our memories are stored, especially traumatic memories, what happens when you go into court, and how, it's a life and death. It feels like a life and death threatening situation. And so therefore it triggers all the fear centers, and in particular, it can impact the Broca's area of the brain, which is connected to our ability to speak. And so you go to court and you can't speak. And the judges will necessarily interpret that as you're lying, you're prevaricating, rather than this is actually showing what happens to somebody who experiences a lot of stress and trauma. I'm aware of our time, so I'm just going to move on fairly quickly. We've touched on some of the key issues. One of the things, particularly for people who've been sex trafficked, is a tremendous amount of shame, this guilt, and you're living with fear, and the lack of trust and confidence. So I've known many women who have been trafficked who come out and they've lost all their strength and energy. They're stuck in bed. Or, one just had this money put under her door for weeks and she just didn't know where she was. She'd been trafficked for 20 years. And it's being overwhelmed. And I won't get into the definition of trauma, but it's basically when you're encountering a threat to your life and it overwhelms your ability to cope. And when you're overwhelmed, we have certain processes that kick in. Again, if we were talking about trauma, we would talk about, the fight, flight, or freeze. And when you're not able to escape, then there's another part of your central nervous system known as the parasympathetic nervous system that kicks in, and therefore you can become quite immobilized, quite what we call hypoaroused. And after you've experienced trauma, if you're able to recover in safety, then you may be able to get on. But most people will think of post-traumatic stress disorder as having nightmares and traumas, and that's part of the reliving. But there's also a whole world of avoidance and just numbing out, where you don't feel anything, or you dissociate, as Feluca talked about, where you space out, you're splitting, and you lose time and place. Some people experience what we call dysregulated thoughts and feelings, and so nothing seems to make sense. You might feel like your hands are very big, or your body is distorted, or your sense of seeing the world through like a screen. You can have all kinds of symptoms that aren't often recognized. You may be hearing voices, feeling people around you. You may, so many people will have sleep issues. The list goes on and on. There's another example here of what kinds of things happen. And I think this is very powerful, that trauma survivors have symptoms instead of memories. It's all to do with the way it's stored in your brain, which is very different, and it appears as fragments. So the visual image is separated out from your body sensations, it's separated out from your thought processes, your behavior patterns. And so you can end up doing things that are not really within your control. Now, in terms of working professionally, therapeutically, the basic standard is that you first work to help stabilize people, help them to manage in the present. It used to be you had to go back to the past and deal with the traumas, to talk about it, but that's usually down the line. So there's if you debrief people too quickly, they can get re-traumatized by that. People need to be able to be physically safe and to begin to feel psychologically safe. They need to be able to build up resources by having networks of support. As Feluca pointed out, she had colleagues, she had people supporting her in the refugee sector, people supporting in the NHS. So it's the external, but also learning strategies to manage these very disturbing bodily symptoms. And when someone's in a place where they're more stabilized, they can then begin to do some of that work around processing trauma memories. Okay. I thought this is quite interesting for people to know, because when we initially feel threatened, we tend to become what we call hyper-aroused. Your heart starts to beat faster, your breath goes shallow, you're hyper-vigilant. But as I said, when you're in a situation where you can't escape, and the other part of your nervous system kicks in, that's when you might freeze or just collapse. And when someone is hypo-aroused, they appear numb. They feel disconnected, an absence of body sensations, and almost feeling unreal. And so, as therapists, we work to help people to become more connected to reality again, to be more grounded when they're hypo-aroused, or when they're hyper-aroused, to calm down. And so what you've got is this window of tolerance. And when people are here in that window of tolerance, then you can think, you can plan, you can talk. But if you're hyper-aroused, like if someone's very angry, their thinking brain closes down. And same with the hypo-arousal. Even though someone looks very numb, there's still a lot of stuff that's going on. Okay, so for people who want to offer support, like in churches, it's really important to be transparent, because trust is broken. Do not promise things that you can't deliver. You're not going to be someone's best friend for life. Just promise to do what you feel able to do, and collaborate. Be respectful. We don't assume we know what's going to be what someone needs. we need to speak. And you know, Feluca, when I was talking to you last night, you talked about an organization that was very focused on empowering. And so I just want to know if there's anything else you'd like to say about what's helped you to move on.
I guess for me, the two main things, sport and books. Those two things help me in a big way. Sport, it helps me in the sense that when I'm in that particular moment, everything else falls away. It's just me and that particular sport that I am doing. And with books, it's more of, it gives me a sense of purpose, my ability to learn, to understand other things. And I had a dream to go to university, but at the time I didn't have GCSEs or A levels. I didn't go to school. And it was more of, how do I then accomplish that dream? So there are different charities, and I can't stress out the importance of charities and the impact they help in helping me move on and being a survivor rather than a victim. And one of the charities was called ERA, which was more or less saying that if a woman has a skill, then it's harder for other people to exploit you when you know you have a skill that you can actually go out and use to be able to earn money. And there's another charity called, I think, the City of Sanctuary. They helped to sponsor my scholarship to go to universities. And I had to do self-study and then do the exam as an external candidate. And a lot of people helped me pay for the exam. And all I had to do is figure out what the syllabus is, study for it, and do the exam. And then I remember when I went to Malamdale, which was where I met a lady called Mary Brandon. And I was talking to her about my dream and what I wanted to do. And I was like, oh, you can go to uni, you know. I'm like, yeah, how's that going to work? I've tried. And myself, it doesn't apply to me. I went to college, they told me I don't have the ability to do so. And it's like there were other ways around it. And I remember she gave me a number and asked me to go during the day to come and meet her. And we did. And then we looked through different things that I could do. And I think Rita's had this IELTS class that I went to every day. So, and then some of my friends and family, like Tusi and my GP as well, put the money together to pay for the exam. So I just have to like go to the classes, study for it, did the exam, and I passed. And it was more of, I applied to UCAS and everything like that, which I didn't know about. But this charity knows a lot about it, and they gave me those information. And once I passed it and I applied and I got it, I'm like, yay, I got into uni, I got accepted. And then I have to pay international fee, which was, I think, 18,900 and something every year. So I'm like, okay, I know I had a dream, and I know it was fair, like, I didn't think it was going to happen anyway. But, oh well, it was good while it lasted. I'm like, no. And Mary was like, no, there are other ways around that too. I'm like, really? How? Tell me more. And then she told me about the City of Sanctuary scholarship. And I applied to it. I'm like, they're not going to say yes. I'm like, I've met you. I've seen how you speak. They're going to love you. I'm like, okay, I applied for it. And I got it. For a while, it felt like a dream. Even now, I cannot tell you that I have a Bachelor of Engineering. And I got a first class in software engineering. And now I work as a software engineer. I went from having absolutely no formal education to being a software engineer through the help of the community and charities along the way. That helps me. That helps give me a sense of achievement, something to look forward to, something to live for, and knowing that I am a human being. I'm not worthless as the people told me I was. I actually have something I can contribute to the society. So yeah, that did help me to move forward.
Okay, Feluca, thank you so much. That is such an inspiring story, and you know, I'm so pleased you mentioned City of Sanctuary. Please go onto the website. City of Sanctuary is dedicated to creating a culture of welcome throughout the UK, and there's many different streams. I'm involved with the health stream. It was the streams of the universities of Sanctuary that helped Feluca move on, and you can be a part of that. I'm just aware of time. I think my time is just about finished, so I will just move on very quickly. You mentioned some of the things that helped you, Feluca, like exercise, your sport, and the opportunity to learn. For many people who've been victims of trafficking, who are seeking asylum, other asylum seekers, the opportunity to learn English, to go to college, is one of the very bright lights in the midst of a lot of difficulties. So having meaningful activities is really important. As an asylum seeker, you get very little money. You get like £36 a week. And so if you're in churches, and I just encourage you to just find ways of being able to support people. I've just made a note of some of the things here that we will help people with, but I'll pass on the PowerPoints and you can see that later on. As a therapist, we work to nice guidelines and look at what are evidence-based trauma processing. I do a form of therapy called eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which addresses some of those things that Feluca talked about, like the triggers of smells, the bad memories, the sleep problems, all those things designed to help people sort of just manage and to deal with the past. But more importantly, and I don't really have time to talk about Fatima, I do actually want to mention her briefly, if you'll indulge me for a minute, because this was the woman who was from an East African country. She was a widow. She had a small business selling food and clothing and things. She had a stepdaughter and 2 sons, but she didn't know her sons were involved in anti-government activities until one day she was home with one of her sons and the police came to arrest them. They arrested this son and he disappeared. She never saw him again, but they brutally attacked and raped her. And then several weeks later, they returned again to look for the other son. And because the neighbors knew what was going on, but they didn't dare intervene, they warned her son away, so he escaped. But once again, she was brutally raped and beaten and just left bleeding. She obviously knew she had to leave. She was no longer safe. And so she was helped by a woman who was actually in the British Army, who said, I'll help you come to the UK and help you get a job. And so she brought her to the UK. And in fact, she was in North Yorkshire. And she then abused her as involved her in domestic servitude. So it happens right here. It can be ordinary British people who can be drawn into actually exploiting someone else. And so this woman, she was denied access to healthcare. Her passport was taken away. And it was only when this family moved to London and they had no room for her that she was just discarded, and she was helped to apply for asylum. She was 58, 59, 60. Her asylum claim was refused. She was made destitute. She had an operation for a hernia, but nowhere to live. And again, it was the role of the charitable sector that helped her to get some temporary accommodation. She came back into the asylum process. She came to Solace. I did a torture screening. I wrote a mental health report so that she could get a full medical legal report. And, we offered her, I worked with her therapeutically. She was involved in a group with other women, which helped her. But she was so ashamed that when she spoke, she had her hand over her mouth. But eventually, she was able to get her refugee status. And so when people in the Home Office talk about these terrible people who are part of this conspiracy to keep people in the country, that's what we do. We try, because many people go in and out of the system, they get refused, and they need to be able to get the right kind of evidence. And some of that is medical evidence, some of it may be objective evidence. But I can't say anything more because I'm overrun already. But for those in the church who do want to support people, to be aware that there's things that you can do that professionals can't, which is to provide the community. People who are traumatized, people who've been victimized, will appear in the church. But if they are judged or ignored or, gossiped about, they will run away. So it's really important that we create context where people can be accepted and not love bombed or ignored, but just to provide a safe place. Yeah. And you can provide that practical help, going with people to court. You can signpost people for accessing other kinds of services to solicitors. You may help pay for a solicitor. You can help people to make sense of why, why has this happened to me? Did God hate me? Did I do something? These are existential faith questions that we in the church can provide safe spaces with wisdom and love and compassion to help people come to grips with some of these painful issues. Okay, I won't say anything more. We've just talked about the need to be trustworthy and safe. And I've over my time, but there are some more resources here. And now I will stop sharing and give you any opportunity to make a comment or question before we finish.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I'm sorry that you didn't have enough time to fully share everything that you could have done in that incredibly rich presentation. And I do want to thank you for making room for Feluca to share her story. And I do want to thank you, Feluca, as well, for your courage and your vulnerability in making everything that we've spoken about this morning live for us. And we honour you and we pray for you. God bless you. Now, I was going to ask my colleague, Mark Roques, to sum up for us, but I don't really want to run over time. You've all been incredibly faithful and patient in being here all morning. And I'm just going to ask Mark if he would to just pray for us as we finish today. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah. Let's just pray for a few moments. Lord Jesus, it must break your heart to see all this misery in our world. Your creation is great to hear so many of these stories about people who are so abused and broken. And Lord, we just pray for the coming of your kingdom, Lord Jesus. We pray that you would come and use us to be a blessing, to reach out and to be fully informed and to really make a difference, because we know that one day, Lord Jesus, you will return and you will put everything right and you will make this world perfect and without the misery and suffering we see it today. So we just commend all the speakers to you. We thank you for Elaine and Tim and Anne and, of course, for Luca. And we just pray, Father God, that we would be faithful to you and obedient in terms of this massive issue. And we just pray that you would empower us to be faithful and to really reach out to those people that we know who have been trafficked. And we ask this all in the name of Jesus, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mark.
Can I say one thing? Just following on from what Tim Nelson said this morning about the Nationalities and Borders Bill that's being discussed at the moment, please sign a petition, write to your MP, and you can go to the Hope for Justice website, Freedom from Torture, Refugee Action, because it's going to criminalize people just for crossing. They're making, I can't get into a big distinction between the resettlement. They're very proud of that. It's a good program, but it will penalize those people who are most vulnerable. So please follow that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That's something very real and very practical that we can all do. And it just remains for me to thank all of you for being online with us this morning at this conference. I'm thrilled by what we've heard. I'm challenged by what we've heard. And I thank God that we can actually use our voices and our actions as well as our prayers and our thinking to do something about this. So we will send you the link to YouTube when we put the talks online, which I hope will not be too far in the future. And you already have the Zoom links to the follow-up meetings at the end of March and April, where different speakers will pick up different threads, perhaps more practical, more concrete threads of what we've spoken about this morning. And so we invite you to be with us at the end of March, and at the end of April, we will send round reminder emails for that. But for now, I just want to wish you, on behalf of Thinking Faith Network, an excellent end of your weekend and a very, very happy Christmas, a blessed, peaceful and holy time until we meet again. So thank you and goodbye for now.